This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't believe what happened at Chingasa 3 days ago. I've barely slept since then, and my mind keeps replaying everything over and over like a broken record. I need to get this out, even if no one believes me. So my birthday fell right in the middle of quarantine last year, April 20th, 2020. Obviously, all the bars were closed, no restaurants were open, and we were all going stir-crazy locked up in our apartments in Bogota. My friends Martín, Camila, and Lucia had been talking about doing something special for weeks, but with all the restrictions, our options were seriously limited. The night before my birthday, Martín called me with this crazy idea. "Daniel, we're taking you to Chingasa tomorrow. Don't argue. We all need to get out of the city before we lose our minds." For those who don't know, Chingasa National Reserve is this massive park about an hour and a half outside Bogota. It's known for these beautiful lagoons surrounded by Paramo, which is like this unique mountain ecosystem with weird plants that look like they're from another planet. The main attraction is this huge lagoon that sits at like 12,000 feet elevation. I reminded Martín that the reserve was closed because of COVID, and he just laughed and said, "That's why we're leaving at 5 in the morning. The rangers don't start patrolling until 8 or 9. I should have said no. I wish I had said no. We met outside my apartment at 5 exactly. Martín pulled up in his old Toyota 4Runner, with Camilla in the passenger seat and Lucia in the back. They had a cake, candles, sandwiches, a bottle of whiskey, and even party hats. It was honestly touching, and I felt that rush of gratitude you get when your friends go out of their way for you. The drive up into the mountains started off perfectly. We wound our way up these misty green hills, the city falling away behind us. The girls were playing this playlist of cumbia and reggaeton, and we were all singing and joking around. It felt so good to be out after being cooped up for weeks. But about halfway to the reserve, it started raining. Not just a drizzle, but that heavy mountain rain that makes it hard to see the road. Martín slowed down, cursing under his breath. I could tell everyone was thinking the same thing. This birthday excursion was about to be a wet, muddy disaster. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested, trying not to sound disappointed. "No way," Lucia said, squeezing my shoulder from the back seat. "It's your birthday. The weather in the mountains changes every 5 minutes. It'll clear up." When we reached the entrance to the reserve, the rain was still pouring down. There was a gate with a chain, but no guards. Martín just drove around it on this little dirt track that looked like it had been used for exactly this purpose many times before. "Are we seriously doing this?" Camilla asked, her voice tight with nerves. "We're already here," Martín replied, "and Daniel needs a proper birthday." The drive through the reserve was tense. The rain hammered on the roof of the car, and we kept scanning for ranger vehicles. We had to go slow because the roads were muddy and unmarked. After about 20 minutes of driving through the park, we reached the small parking area near the trail that leads to the main lagoon. We sat in the car for a while, watching the rain, no one wanting to be the first to admit this was a bad idea. Then something strange happened. As we looked toward the lagoon, we noticed the rain was stopping, but only in that area. It was like the lagoon had its own weather system. Around us, it was still pouring, but over the water, the clouds were breaking up. "See?" Lucia said, grinning. "I told you it would clear." We grabbed our backpacks and started hiking. The trail was slippery and muddy, but our spirits lifted as we got closer to the lagoon and the sky continued to clear. By the time we reached the viewpoint, the sun was actually breaking through in patches, creating this surreal landscape where some areas were bright and clear while others remained shrouded in mist. That's when I first noticed something odd about the fog. It seemed to move, purposefully. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't drifting like normal fog. It was swirling in these concentrated patches, almost like it was watching us. I didn't mention it because 2 years ago I'd come to Chingasa with another group of friends, and I'd seen something that made them all think I was either hallucinating or lying. I'd wandered off from the group to take some photos and found myself in this small clearing surrounded by frailejones, those weird tall plants that look like something from a Dr. Seuss book. Standing among them was a woman in a long black dress. When she turned toward me, I dropped my camera because her face was empty, not disfigured, not hidden, just absent, like someone had erased it. By the time I picked up my camera, she was gone. My friends never let me live it down, calling me Daniel the Drunk, even though I'd only had 1 beer that day. So I kept quiet about the strange fog and just tried to enjoy the birthday picnic my friends had planned. We found a relatively dry spot about 50 meters from the lagoon's edge and laid out a blanket. The view was breathtaking. The dark blue water of the lagoon surrounded by these yellowish-green hills, patches of mist hanging between them. Despite the beauty, there was this heavy silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. "This place is incredible," Camilla said, taking photos with her phone. "Totally worth breaking the law." Martine pulled out the bottle of whiskey and some plastic cups. "To Daniel, sorry your birthday had to happen during the apocalypse." We all laughed and took a shot. The whiskey burned going down, but it felt good, warming me against the mountain chill. Lucia brought out the cake, somehow still intact after the bumpy drive, and stuck in a few candles. "Should we sing?" Camilla asked, looking around nervously. "I mean, we're not supposed to be here." "Oh, come on. Who's gonna hear us?" Martine scoffed. "The nearest person is probably miles away." So they sang "Happy Birthday" to me, their voices sounding small and strange in the vast emptiness around us. I was about to blow out the candles when I heard it. Someone else was singing too. No, not singing, humming. A low, melodic humming that seemed to come from somewhere near the water. "Do you guys hear that?" I whispered, the candles still flickering in front of me. They all fell silent. The humming continued for a few seconds, then stopped. "It's just an echo," Martine said, but I could see the uncertainty in his face. "Echoes don't keep going after we stop singing," Lucia pointed out, her voice barely audible. I turned to look at the lagoon and felt my blood turn to ice. There, standing at the water's edge, was a woman in a black dress. She was facing the water, her back to us, long dark hair hanging down to her waist. "Guys," I whispered, pointing with a shaking hand. "Look." Only Martine turned to look where I was pointing. His face went pale. "What the hell?" he muttered. What are you looking at?" Camilla asked, her voice rising with panic. "There's someone down by the water," I said. Camilla and Lucia both looked, but their expressions remained confused. "I don't see anyone," Lucia said. "She's right there," Martine insisted, standing up. "In the black dress." The woman still hadn't moved. She just stood there, impossibly still, like she was part of the landscape. What happened next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. The humming started again, but this time it was louder, and it was definitely coming from the woman by the water. It was a simple, repeating melody that somehow felt ancient and familiar. The strangest part was that I didn't feel scared, at least not of her. What frightened me was the way Martine was reacting. and the fact that only he and I could see her. I felt this bizarre sense of recognition, like I knew her from somewhere, like she was waiting specifically for me. "We need to go," Camilla said, already packing up the food. "Right now." "Wait," I said, still staring at the woman. "I want to see who it is." "Daniel, don't be stupid." Lucia grabbed my arm. "Even if there is someone there, they shouldn't be here either. Could be anyone." At that moment, as if responding to our conversation, the humming grew louder. This time, all four of us froze. They had all heard it. "That's it. We're leaving," Martin said, grabbing the whiskey bottle and shoving it into his backpack. We packed up in record time, not even bothering to properly wrap the remaining cake. As we hurried back to the trail, I couldn't help looking back one more time. The woman was gone, but the patch of fog where she had been standing seemed to twist and expand, reaching toward us like fingers. The hike back to the car was tense and silent. We kept close together, jumping at every sound. The weather had turned again, the sky darkening with heavy clouds. By the time we reached the car, it was raining once more. Martin drove even faster on the way out, not caring about the muddy roads or the risk of getting caught by rangers. No one spoke until we were well outside the reserve, back on the main highway to Bogota. "What the hell was that?" Camilla finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Probably just some other hiker," Lucia suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Then why couldn't you two see her?" Martin asked. "Maybe the angle or the fog," Lucia replied weakly. I sat in silence, still trying to process the strange lack of fear I'd felt. Why wasn't I terrified like Martin? Why did the woman seem familiar? We were about 20 minutes from Bogota when Martin suddenly pulled over to the side of the road. He turned off the engine and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. "Daniel," he said, finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Remember 2 years ago when you said you saw a woman with no face?" I nodded slowly, my mouth going dry. "The woman by the water today," he continued. "She didn't have any feet. She was just hovering there, a few inches above the ground." The car fell completely silent. I felt the blood drain from my face as Martin's words sank in. "That's not all," he added, his voice breaking slightly. "When I looked at her reflection in the water, there was no face. I haven't been able to sleep properly since that day. I keep seeing her in my dreams, and sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can hear that humming. The worst part is this feeling I can't shake, that she was there for me, that she knew me, and that she's still waiting by that lagoon for me to return. I don't know who or what we saw at Chingasa that day, but I know that whatever it wasn't human, and I know that I'm never going back there again." Story 2. I never meant for things to get this bad. It wasn't like I woke up one day and decided to become what I am. But somewhere between losing my job at the processing plant and moving back to my dad's place at 32, I found myself in a place I never expected to be. Living with my father again after all these years is its own special kind of hell. He's not a bad guy, he's just disappointed, and disappointment is worse than anger. You can fight against anger. Disappointment just seeps into the walls and the silence at the dinner table. The drugs started as just a way to cope, a little something to take the edge off reality. Nothing hardcore at first, just weed, then pills when I could get them. Now it's whatever will keep me numb for a few hours. I don't even really enjoy the high anymore. I just need to not feel like myself for a while. Dad goes to bed early, always has. By 9:30, he's snoring loud, enough that I can hear him through the walls of this old farmhouse. That's when I start getting antsy. That's when I need to get out. See, I can't do this stuff in the house. Dad would smell it, find it, or just somehow know. He's got this sixth sense about disappointment. So I started taking walks. Night walks into the woods behind our property. It's actually peaceful out there once you get used to the darkness. 15 acres of trees that eventually back up to other properties, other farms, other lives. I've been walking these woods since I was a kid, so even high, I can usually find my way around. Usually. Last night was different. It was cold, unseasonably cold for October. The kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt when you breathe in too deep. I'd gotten my hands on some really good stuff earlier in the day, better than my usual. The guy I buy from said it was premium, which usually means it's either going to be amazing or it'll kill me. Either outcome seemed acceptable at the time. I waited until I heard Dad snoring, grabbed my jacket, lighter, pipe, and the little baggie, and slipped out the back door. The cold hit me immediately, but I didn't go back for gloves or a hat. I just needed to get away, get high, and escape for a while. The woods were especially dark last night. No moon, just endless black between the trees. I used my phone's flashlight until I reached my usual spot, a fallen log about 15 minutes into the forest. Far enough that no one would smell anything, but not so far that I'd get lost trying to find my way back. I sat down and packed the pipe with shaking hands, partly from the cold, partly from anticipation. That first hit it was something else. The guy wasn't lying about premium. The rush hit me almost immediately, and I felt my body sink into the log beneath me, like I was melting into the forest floor. I don't know how long I sat there. Time gets weird when you're high. Minutes stretch into hours, or hours compress into seconds. But at some point I decided to walk. This wasn't part of my usual routine. Normally I'd just sit, enjoy the high, then stumble back home when it started to wear off. But something about this stuff made me want to move, to explore. The forest looked different in my altered state. The trees seemed to bend toward me as I passed, like they were trying to whisper secrets. I wasn't scared, though. I felt like I belonged there, like the darkness was cradling me. I walked and walked, deeper than I'd ever gone before. I wasn't using my flashlight anymore, partly to save battery, partly because the darkness felt comforting, like a blanket. I just let my feet carry me wherever they wanted to go. I don't know how long I walked for, maybe an hour, 2, but suddenly I realized I was at the edge of the woods. There was a clearing ahead of me, and in the faint ambient light, I could make out a shape by the road, a mailbox. Something about it tugged at my memory. I'd seen this mailbox before. I moved closer, squinting in the darkness, trying to make out the name on the side. And that's when it hit me like a punch to the gut. Anderson, Old Man Anderson, my father's neighbor, the property that bordered ours to the east. I'd somehow walked in a complete circle and ended up at Anderson's place, but that wasn't right. His property was a good 2 miles from ours by road. How the hell had I ended up here? I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. My drugged brain was struggling to process this information when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Light spilled out from Anderson's house, cutting a yellow path across his front yard, and there was a shadow in that light. Someone was coming out. Pure panic hit me then. I was standing at the end of this man's driveway I checked my phone, 2:17 in the morning, high as a kite, trespassing, with drugs in my pocket. Anderson knew my dad. They weren't close, but they nodded to each other. At the hardware store. If he caught me here, like this? I backed away from the mailbox, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. My back hit a tree at the edge of the woods, and I pressed myself against it, praying the darkness would swallow me. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Anderson was walking down his driveway. I could hear him muttering to himself, something about damned raccoons. He must have heard something, maybe me, and thought it was animals getting into his trash again. I held my breath as he approached the mailbox. He was so close now, maybe 20 feet away. If he turned his head just slightly to the left, he'd see me standing there, eyes wide, pupils dilated, clutching a tree like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. I've never been a religious man, but in that moment, I prayed. I prayed to whatever might be listening that he wouldn't see me, that he wouldn't call out, that he wouldn't reach for his phone and call the sheriff, or worse, call my dad. Anderson paused at his mailbox. He opened it, checked inside. Why was he checking his mail at 2 a.m? Closed it again, and then just stood there, like he was listening, like he knew something wasn't right. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Him standing at his mailbox, me pressed against the tree, not daring to breathe. It felt like hours. My legs started to cramp. My lungs burned from holding my breath. The high was still strong, but now it was tinged with terror, making everything sharper, more dangerous. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Anderson turned and walked back to his house. I watched the yellow light from his door get blocked by his silhouette, then heard the door close with a definitive click. I collapsed against the tree, gasping for air. My heart was still racing, and I could feel cold sweat under my clothes despite the freezing temperature. I'd come so close to disaster, so close to everything falling apart. When I could finally move again, I crept back into the woods, moving as quietly as possible. I had no idea how to get home. I was completely turned around, and the panic had sobered me up just enough to realize how utterly lost I was. I pulled out my phone to use the GPS, but in my rush to hide from Anderson, I must have dropped it. It wasn't in my pocket. Panic rose again, threatening to choke me. Not only was I lost in the woods in the middle of the night, high on who knows what, but now I had no way to find my way home or call for help. I started walking back the way I thought I'd come, but everything looked different. Every tree, every shadow seemed unfamiliar and threatening. The woods that had felt so welcoming earlier now felt hostile, like they were closing in on me. The cold was really biting now. My fingers were numb, and I couldn't stop shivering. The high was still there, but it had changed, become darker somehow. I kept seeing shapes moving between the trees, hearing whispers just at the edge of my hearing. I walked for what felt like hours, getting more and more desperate. What if I couldn't find my way back? What if I died out here, frozen and lost, and they didn't find my body until spring? What would that do to my dad? Just when I was about to give up hope, to sit down and wait for morning, I saw a familiar shape ahead. The old oak with the split trunk. It was near the edge of our property. Somehow, miraculously, I'd found my way back. I stumbled toward home, relief making me dizzy. Or maybe that was the drugs. Either way, I made it back to the house, slipped in through the back door, and collapsed on my bed without even taking off my shoes. I woke up this morning with a pounding headache and the events of the night coming back in fragments. Dad was already up, making coffee in the kitchen. He looked at me, at my dirty clothes and shoes, and just shook his head before turning back to the coffee maker. Later, I retraced my steps as best I could, looking for my phone. I found it near Anderson's mailbox, screen cracked but still working. As I picked it up, I noticed Anderson watching me from his porch. He raised his hand in a wave, and I waved back, wondering if he recognized me from last night, if he knew what I'd been doing. I've been sitting in my room all day, thinking about what happened, about how close I came to being caught, about how I could have died out there in the cold, about how this addiction is leading me deeper and deeper into the darkness. But even now, with the sun going down and the woods turning black again, I can feel the itch starting, the need, the craving that's stronger than fear or common sense or self-preservation. I know I'll go out again tonight. I know I'll risk it all again for a few hours of escape, because that's what addiction is, knowing the danger and walking into it anyway. Knowing you're one wrong turn away from disaster and taking that turn regardless. Dad's in his room now. I can hear the TV playing some old western. Soon, the snoring will start. And then I'll grab my jacket, my lighter, what's left in the baggie, and I'll slip out into the night again. Because the truth is, I'm more afraid of facing reality than I am of what waits for me in those woods. Story 3. I still struggle to talk about what happened to me last August. It's been almost 5 months, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about those headlights illuminating that car seat in the middle of nowhere. I've seen therapists, joined support groups, but nothing erases what happened that night. I work at the Rusty Nail, a little pub about 20 minutes from my house. It's not glamorous, but the money's decent and the regulars are mostly harmless. That Friday night had been absolute hell though. We were short-staffed because Megan called in sick again, and it felt like everyone in 3 counties decided they needed a drink at the same exact time. By the time my shift ended at 2 in the morning, my feet were throbbing, my back was killing me, and all I wanted was my bed. I remember walking to my car in the back lot, fumbling with my keys because my fingers were numb from carrying ice buckets all night. I was so exhausted I could barely keep my eyes open. That's when I decided to take Pine Hollow Road. It's this narrow, winding back road that cuts through about 5 miles of dense forest, but it shaves about 10 minutes off my commute. During the day, it's beautiful, all tall pines and dappled sunlight. At night, it's different. The rational part of my brain knew it wasn't smart. My phone had died hours earlier. I'd forgotten my charger, and there's 0 cell service on that road anyway. But I'd taken it dozens of times before without any issues, and I was just so damn tired. The moment I turned onto Pine Hollow, the darkness swallowed my car. My headlights barely cut 20 feet into the pitch black. The trees on either side of the road created this tunnel effect that always made me feel small. Usually, I'd crank up some music to distract myself, but that night I just drove in silence, focused on staying awake and counting the minutes until I'd be home. I was about halfway through, right around the sharpest curve where the road dips down before climbing again, when I saw it. At first, my brain didn't even process what my eyes were seeing. There, sitting directly in the middle of the road, was an infant car seat, just sitting there. No car in sight, no people, nothing. Just this carrier with what looked like a blue blanket inside. I slammed on my brakes so hard my seatbelt locked up, digging into my chest. My tires screeched against the asphalt. I stopped maybe 6 feet away from it, my headlights illuminating this surreal scene. I sat there for what felt like forever, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, heart hammering in my chest. All at once, every horror story I'd ever heard came flooding back. I remembered reading about traffickers who used tactics like this, leaving a baby carrier or a crying doll to get women to stop and get out of their cars. I remembered my dad always telling me, "If something looks off, Lily, it probably is." But what if I was wrong? What if there was actually a baby in there? What kind of person would I be if I just drove away? How would I live with myself? I turned my engine off and listened. Complete silence, except for the tick-tick-tick of my cooling engine. No crying, no sounds at all, except the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. My hands were shaking as I turned the key back in the ignition, thinking maybe I should just go around it and floor it. But the road was too narrow, and the ditches on either side were steep. I'd have to move it. "Think, Lily," I whispered to myself. I had a tire iron in my trunk. That could be a weapon if I needed one. The car seat was only about 6 feet away. I could run out, check quickly, and be back in my car in seconds. I took a deep breath and stepped out, leaving my driver's door open and the engine running. The forest air felt heavy and damp against my skin. My footsteps crunched too loudly on the gravel shoulder as I approached. Tire iron gripped so tightly in my hand that my fingers hurt. When I reached the carrier, I hesitated. The blue blanket was bundled in a way that made it impossible to see inside without leaning down. Fighting every instinct screaming at me to run, I crouched and pulled back the corner of the blanket with trembling fingers. Empty. Just an empty blanket folded to look like it was holding something. The wave of relief hit me so hard I almost laughed, but that relief evaporated instantly when I heard a twig snap in the woods to my right. That distinct crack echoed through the trees, and I knew immediately I wasn't alone. I didn't even have time to stand up straight. Someone grabbed me from behind, a gloved hand clamping over my mouth with such force that my teeth cut into the inside of my lip. The taste of copper filled my mouth as I tried to scream, the sound muffled against the leather of the glove. "Got one," a male voice called out, sounding young and excited. There was laughter, multiple voices coming from the trees around me. I thrashed wildly, dropping the tire iron as I clawed at the arm around my neck. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I kicked backward, connecting with something solid, and heard a grunt of pain. The grip loosened just enough for me to wrench my head free. "Help!" I screamed into the darkness, my voice echoing off the trees. Something hard struck the back of my head. Stars exploded behind my eyes as pain radiated through my skull. I stumbled forward, disoriented, only to feel a kick connect with my ribs. I fell to my knees on the rough asphalt, gasping. "Should have kept driving, stupid bitch," someone laughed. It sounded like a teenage boy, his voice cracking mid-sentence. I tried to crawl toward my car, but a boot came down on my hand, grinding my fingers into the road. I screamed again, this time from pain rather than for help. There was more laughter, like this was some kind of game to them. "Please," I begged, "take my car, take my money, just please don't." Another blow to the head. This one sent me sprawling onto my side. I could feel warm wetness trickling down my temple. Through blurry vision, I saw several dark figures standing over me. 3, maybe 4 of them, all wearing dark hoodies with the hoods pulled up. "Check her pockets," one of them said. Rough hands turned me over, digging through my jacket and jeans. They took my wallet, my keys, even the hair tie from my wrist. "Dude, her phone's probably in the car," another voice said. "Well, go get it then, dumbass." I tried to focus, to memorize something about them. Their voices, their builds, anything. But the pain in my head made it impossible to think clearly. One of them crouched down next to me, so close I could smell beer and cigarettes on his breath. "Next time, mind your own fucking business," he whispered, then stood and kicked me hard in the stomach. I curled into a ball, trying to protect myself from the blows that followed. Kicks to my back, my legs, my arms. One of them stomped on my ankle, and I felt something crunch. The pain was blinding. I don't know how long it lasted. At some point, I stopped feeling the individual blows and just sank into a haze of pain. The last thing I remember is the sound of my car engine revving, headlights sweeping across me as they turned it around, and then darkness as they drove away, leaving me bleeding on the road. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, the forest was still pitch black. Every part of my body screamed in pain. I was lying in a ditch just off the road. They must have dragged me there to hide me from any passing cars. My clothes were damp with dew and blood. My ankle throbbed with such intensity that when I tried to stand, I immediately vomited into the grass beside me. I knew I had to move, had to find help. Pine Hollow Road isn't exactly high traffic, especially at that hour, and I couldn't just lie there hoping someone would find me. The nearest house was miles away, but I remembered there was a small village about 2 miles down the road, just a handful of houses and a volunteer fire station that doubled as an emergency medical center. Getting to my feet was excruciating. I had to use a tree trunk to pull myself up, careful not to put weight on my injured ankle. The world tilted and spun, and I had to close my eyes until the nausea passed. When I opened them again, I realized just how dark it was. No moon, no stars visible through the thick canopy of trees, no headlights from my car, just oppressive, complete darkness. I started limping along the edge of the road, using the trees for support. Each step sent jolts of pain up my leg, but I kept going. I had to. I talked to myself the whole way, muttering encouragements, counting steps, anything to keep myself conscious. Just keep moving, Lily. One more step. You can do this. Just one more step. Time became meaningless. It could have been 20 minutes or 3 hours. All I knew was pain and the desperate need to keep moving forward. At one point, I thought I heard a car in the distance, but by the time I turned around, the sound had faded. Maybe I'd imagined it. When I finally saw lights in the distance, I almost cried with relief. The little village of Oak Ridge came into view, just a cluster of porch lights and street lamps, but it looked like heaven to me. I stumbled faster, ignoring the fire in my ankle, the throbbing in my head, the burning in my lungs. I remember reaching the volunteer fire station, pounding on the door with the last of my strength. When it opened, revealing a startled-looking older man in an EMT uniform, my legs finally gave out. I collapsed forward, and everything went black again. I woke up in the county hospital with an IV in my arm and my mom holding my hand, tears streaming down her face. The doctors told me I had a mild concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured ankle, and more bruises than they could count. They'd found gravel embedded in my palms and knees. I was lucky, they said. It could have been so much worse. The police came later that day. I told them everything I could remember, which wasn't much, just fragments of voices, dark hoodies, the smell of beer. They found my car 2 days later, abandoned in a Walmart parking lot 30 miles away. The surveillance cameras were too grainy to make out faces, but they showed 4 figures getting out of my car and climbing into another one that was waiting for them. It took nearly 3 weeks, but they eventually caught them. 4 boys from the neighboring county, all 17 to 19 years old. They'd been drinking at a bonfire in the woods and decided it would be funny to set up the car seat trap. They didn't even need money. They all came from good families. They just wanted to see if someone would stop. They're facing charges now: assault, robbery, grand theft auto. Their parents hired expensive lawyers, of course. One of the detectives told me that during questioning, one of the boys actually said they didn't mean to hurt me that bad, like that somehow made it better. I still can't drive alone at night, can't take back roads. I've moved back in with my parents temporarily because I can't stand being alone in my apartment. Every unexpected noise makes me jump. Every time I see a group of young men in hoodies, my heart races until I can't breathe. The worst part isn't even the physical pain or the fear. It's the doubt. That moment of hesitation when I saw the car seat and couldn't decide what to do. I still don't know what the right choice would have been. What if there had been a baby? What kind of person drives past a baby? But now I know the truth that most of us don't want to face. Sometimes evil doesn't come with a warning. It's just there, waiting in the dark, patient and opportunistic. And all the good intentions in the world can't protect you from it. Story 4. I still don't like driving at night. It's been 3 years since that drive to Punta Penasco, and I've made every excuse possible to avoid driving after sunset. My wife thinks I'm being paranoid, but she wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw. This happened during the summer of 2018. I'm part of an amateur racing team, nothing professional, just a group of guys who love cars and participate in small local events. We were heading to Punta Penasco for a weekend rally. My buddy Joel and I drove separately from the rest of the team because we needed to bring extra parts and tools. We left Phoenix around 4 in the afternoon, which was a mistake. We hit traffic, getting out of the city, then spent way too long at the border crossing. By the time we were properly into Mexico, the sun was already setting. I remember checking the time, 7:45 p.m., and calculating that we wouldn't reach our destination until after midnight at this rate. Joel offered to drive, but I waved him off. I got it. Just keep me company so I don't fall asleep. The main highway wasn't bad, but when we turned onto the route toward the Gulf of California, things changed quickly. This wasn't the well-traveled tourist route to Rocky Point. We were taking a shortcut that the team leader had suggested, a rough dirt road that curved along the coastline. It would save us an hour, he'd said. I should have known better. The road deteriorated with every mile. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating just enough of the rutted dirt path to keep us moving forward. On the right side, maybe 50 yards away, was the Gulf, a black void that occasionally reflected the moonlight. To our left, endless desert stretched into nothingness. "Man, if we break down out here, we're fucked," Joel said, staring out the window at absolutely nothing. No houses, no streetlights, not even distant points of light from a town or village, just emptiness. "Don't even joke about that," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. My Jeep was reliable, but out here, reliability didn't mean much. One flat tire, one overheated engine, and we'd be stranded until morning at least. We drove in silence for maybe 20 minutes, the only sounds being the crunch of tires on dirt and the radio playing softly. Some Mexican station that kept cutting in and out. I remember the song that was playing when it happened. Despacito. That damn song was everywhere that summer. I noticed the lights in my rearview mirror first. Just a flash. So quick, I thought I'd imagined it. Then they appeared again, brighter this time. "Someone's behind us," I said. Joel twisted in his seat. "Where the hell did they come from? There hasn't been a turnoff for miles." The lights grew larger rapidly. Whoever it was, they were driving fast, dangerously fast for this road. As they got closer, I could see it wasn't normal headlights. This vehicle had a light bar mounted on top, blindingly bright LEDs that flooded my mirrors with white light. "Jesus," I muttered, squinting against the glare. What is this guy's problem? I expected them to pass us. There was room on the road, barely, but instead of going around, they pulled right up to my bumper. I mean, right up. Couldn't have been more than a few feet between us. What the fuck? Joel said, turning completely around now. Is he trying to run us off the road? I sped up a little, hoping they'd back off. They didn't. They matched my speed exactly, staying glued to my bumper. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, my heart starting to pound. I'm not usually an anxious driver, but something about this felt wrong, threatening. Try going faster, Joel suggested, his voice tight. I pressed the accelerator, pushing us to 45, then 50 miles per hour. Dangerous on this unpaved road. The vehicle behind us kept pace effortlessly. Every bump, every rut in the road sent my Jeep bouncing, and I knew if I lost control at this speed, we'd roll. The road curved sharply ahead, following the coastline. I slowed slightly to take the turn. The vehicle behind us didn't. It rammed into my bumper just hard enough to jolt us forward. Shit, I shouted, fighting to keep control. What the hell is wrong with this guy? Joel was fumbling with his phone. No signal. Fuck, there's no signal out here. The vehicle hit us again, harder this time. My hands jerked on the wheel, and for a terrifying moment, I thought we were going off the road. I managed to correct, but my heart was hammering now. Next straight stretch, I'm stopping, I said through gritted teeth. Let this asshole pass. What if they don't want to pass? Joel asked, his voice barely audible over the engine and my own pounding heart. What if they want something else? I didn't answer. I didn't want to think about that possibility. We were in the middle of nowhere, completely vulnerable. The road straightened briefly, and I saw my chance. I hit the brakes and pulled sharply to the right, kicking up a cloud of dust as I brought the Jeep to a stop, half on the shoulder, half in scrubby desert plants. The vehicle behind us slowed, but didn't stop. As it pulled alongside us, I braced myself, expecting to see angry faces, maybe weapons. But the windows were tinted black, completely opaque even with my headlights illuminating them. I couldn't make out anything about the driver or how many people were inside. It was a pickup truck, that much I could tell. Black or dark blue, American-made, but older model. The light bar on top was still blinding, and there were additional lights mounted on the grille. It idled next to us for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds. Then it accelerated sharply, tires spinning in the dirt, and shot forward. We sat in silence, watching the taillights recede into the distance. What the actual fuck? Joel finally said, exhaling loudly. I don't know, man. My hands were shaking on the wheel. Locals messing with tourists? Drunk driver? Let's just get to Penasco, he said. I don't want to be out here anymore. I nodded and pulled back onto the road, driving slower now, still rattled. We followed the same route the truck had taken. The road continued to curve along the Gulf, and up ahead I could see a particularly sharp bend where the coastline jutted out into a small peninsula. Look, Joel said suddenly, pointing ahead. Is that him? I could see the truck's taillights as it approached the curve. It was still going way too fast. The road bent nearly 90 degrees there with a steep drop-off to the water. He's not slowing down, I said, watching in disbelief. What happened? Next makes me question my sanity to this day. The truck didn't slow. It didn't turn. It continued straight ahead, directly toward the cliff edge. I expected to see brake lights, to hear tires screeching, to witness the vehicle fishtailing as the driver realized their mistake. None of that happened. The truck maintained its speed and drove straight off the cliff edge, but it didn't fall. The lights, the headlights, the light bar, all of it, continued in a straight line out over the water. There was no splash, no crash, No impact whatsoever. The truck's lights hovered over the Gulf of California for maybe 3 seconds, continuing the same trajectory they'd been on. Then the lights pitched upward at an impossible angle and shot into the night sky. Not gradually, not in an arc. They accelerated straight up at a speed nothing on Earth could match. Within seconds, they were just pinpricks against the stars, and then they were gone completely. Joel and I sat in stunned silence. I'd stopped the Jeep without realizing it. My foot had hit the brake automatically as my brain tried to process what my eyes had just seen. "Did you?" Joel began, his voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," I replied. "That wasn't possible." "I know." We sat there for at least 5 minutes, neither of us speaking. What was there to say? We'd just witnessed something that defied explanation, that violated everything we understood about reality. Finally, I put the Jeep back in drive and continued forward. When we reached the curve where the truck had gone off, I stopped again. Joel and I both got out, flashlights in hand, and walked to the edge. There was nothing there. No skid marks, no broken guardrail. There wasn't a guardrail to begin with, no debris, just the rocky cliff edge and the black water about 30 feet below. If a truck had gone over, there would be evidence. There would be something. "I don't understand," Joel said, shining his light down at the water. We both saw it. We both saw it drive off, and then... He couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't blame him. We got back in the Jeep and drove the rest of the way to Punta Penasco in complete silence. We arrived after 1 a.m, found our team at the motel, and went through the motions of greeting everyone, unloading gear, getting settled in our room. We never talked about what we saw. Not that night, not the next day during the rally, not on the drive back to Arizona. It was as if we had both silently agreed that discussing it would make it too real, would force us to confront something we weren't prepared to face. I've replayed that night in my mind thousands of times. I've considered every rational explanation. It wasn't a trick of the light. Both of us saw it clearly. It wasn't a hallucination. We experienced the exact same thing independently. It wasn't a mirage or a reflection or any other natural phenomenon I can think of. What bothers me most isn't just that I saw something impossible. It's that whatever was in that truck had been right behind us, had pushed us, had threatened us. What if we hadn't pulled over? What would have happened if we'd kept driving? I still drive that same Jeep. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I check my rearview mirror more often than necessary. I watch for lights that approach too quickly, that shine too brightly. I avoid dark, isolated roads, because now I know that not everything follows the rules we think govern our world. Now I know there are things out there that shouldn't be possible, things that can hunt you down a deserted road in the middle of nowhere, and then vanish into the sky like they never existed at all. Story 5. I've been a cop in Strasbourg for 11 years now. Small town, mostly quiet. The usual domestic calls, drunk drivers, and occasional break-in. Nothing major. That's why I chose to work here instead of somewhere bigger. I'm not built for constant adrenaline. I just wanted to help my community, know the people I protect. I wasn't prepared for what happened 3 months ago. I still see her face every night when I try to sleep. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, unusually warm. I'd just finished my lunch break, turkey sandwich from the deli down the street from the station, when the call came in. Dispatch said there was a disturbance at the Ramada Wyndham off Route 11. Some woman causing problems, breaking things in the lobby. Standard stuff, probably someone having a bad day or drunk in the middle of the afternoon. I told dispatch I'd handle it. When I pulled into the hotel parking lot, I could already see the front desk clerk standing outside looking nervous. He was a young guy, maybe 20, with glasses and a name tag that said Tyler. He waved me over as soon as I stepped out of my cruiser. "She's inside," he said, pointing toward the lobby. "She's been screaming at guests and knocked over our display case. When I asked her to leave, she threw a vase at me." I nodded, taking mental notes. "Anyone hurt?" "No, but she's scaring the guests. She doesn't seem right." I've handled dozens of these situations. People having mental health episodes, drug reactions, extreme stress. I know the protocol: approach calmly, maintain distance, de-escalate. I've always prided myself on talking people down. "I'll handle it," I told Tyler. "Stay out here." The lobby was a mess. A glass display case with hotel merchandise was tipped over, shards everywhere. Brochures scattered across the floor, and there she was, standing by the check-in counter, barefoot despite the glass on the floor. She was clutching what looked like an expensive decorative clock from the hotel's display. Mid-40s maybe, thin with stringy blonde hair. She wore jeans and a stained t-shirt that hung loosely on her frame. I approached slowly, hands visible. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Mitchell. Can we talk for a minute?" Her head snapped toward me, eyes wild and unfocused. I'd seen that look before, the dilated pupils, the constant movement, the twitching. Meth, probably. We've had an increasing problem with it in the county. "I just want to help you," I said, keeping my voice even. "Why don't you come over here so we can talk? Are you staying at the hotel?" She clutched the clock tighter, knuckles white. "They're watching me, in the walls. You hear them too, right?" Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming for hours. "No one's watching you, ma'am. You're safe. Can you tell me your name?" "Melissa," she said, then immediately shook her head. "No, don't say it out loud. They'll hear you." I was about 10 feet away now. "Melissa, I'd like you to put down that clock and come talk to me outside. It's quieter out there." That's when things went sideways. She suddenly lunged forward, grabbing my uniform shirt before I could react. "They sent you!" she screamed in my face, her breath hot and sour. I tried to step back, create space, but she was already moving, shoving me aside and bolting for the door. She was surprisingly fast. "Ma'am, stop!" I yelled, turning to follow her. I'm not in great shape. Desk lunches and midnight snacks have added about 50 pounds to my frame over the years, and chasing suspects has never been my strong suit. I radioed for backup as I pushed through the doors into the parking lot, already winded. "Dispatch, this is Mitchell. Subject is fleeing on foot from the Ramada. Female, approximately 40, blonde, blue shirt, jeans, barefoot, requesting backup." I could see her running toward the back of the hotel, toward the wooded area that borders the property. I followed, unclipping my taser. I wasn't going to draw my gun for this. She was unarmed as far as I could tell, just having a mental health crisis. I lost sight of her when she rounded the corner of the building. By the time I made it there, huffing and puffing, the area seemed empty. Just the hotel dumpsters, a few employee cars, and the edge of the woods, about 30 yards away. "Melissa," I called out, scanning the area. "I'm not going to hurt you. We just need to get you some help." The silence was unnerving. I moved forward cautiously, checking behind the dumpsters. Nothing. Had she made it to the woods already? That's when I heard footsteps behind me, fast, aggressive. I turned just in time to see her charging directly at me from behind a parked van, screaming incoherently. I didn't have time to think. I deployed my taser, aiming for center mass like we're trained. The probes hit her, But she didn't stop. Sometimes that happens with people on stimulants. Their pain response is dulled. I fired a second cartridge, still nothing. She just pulled the probes out like they were nothing more than annoying mosquitoes. Before I could react, she slammed into me. I'm a big guy, 6 foot, 240, but the impact and surprise sent me stumbling backward. I lost my footing on the asphalt and went down hard, landing on my back. The fall knocked the wind out of me. She was on me instantly, her weight pressing down as she clawed at my face. I tried to push her off, but she was stronger than she looked, possessed with that drug-fueled strength that defies logic. In the struggle, she grabbed my radio from my shoulder. I felt the cord go tight around my neck as she wrapped it, twisting to cut off my airway. Panic set in. I couldn't breathe. I could feel my face getting hot, pressure building in my head. With my right hand, I managed to grab my baton from my belt and swung it at her leg. It connected with a solid thud, but she barely flinched. Instead, she wrenched the baton from my grasp. The next moment is seared into my memory. I saw my own baton coming down toward my head. I tried to block it, but wasn't fast enough. The impact was explosive, white light, then ringing in my ears. I felt warm blood running down my temple. Somehow, through the pain and dizziness, I managed to push her off enough to roll to the side. My hand went to my holster, but in the struggle, my gun had fallen to the asphalt beside me. I grabbed for it, desperation overwhelming my training. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice hoarse from being choked. "Don't come any closer!" She was standing now, still holding my baton, swaying slightly. There was no recognition in her eyes, no humanity, just rage and confusion. She took a step toward me. "Please," I begged, pointing my weapon at her. "Drop the baton. I don't want to hurt you." Another step. I was sitting on the ground, blood in my eyes, gun shaking in my hands. "Stop! Police! Drop the weapon!" She lunged. I fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space between the hotel and the tree line. One shot, then another, and another, and another. 4 shots total. Time seemed to stop. She stood there for what felt like forever, a look of surprise replacing the rage. Then she crumpled to the ground, the baton clattering beside her. I crawled over to her, holstering my weapon. Blood was spreading across her chest, soaking through her thin t-shirt. I pressed my hands against the wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. "Stay with me, Melissa," I said, my voice breaking. "Help is coming. Stay with me." Her eyes found mine, suddenly clear, suddenly human again. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but only a bubble of blood formed on her lips. Then her gaze drifted past me, focusing on nothing. I heard sirens in the distance, backup arriving too late. When the other officers found me, I was still pressing on her chest, though I knew it was futile. Officer Daniels, who I've known for 8 years, whose kids play with mine, had to physically pull me away. That's when I broke down. 11 years on the force, and I'd never fired my weapon at a person before. Daniels took over CPR while I sat on the curb, head in my hands. The paramedics arrived within minutes, working frantically to stabilize her before loading her into the ambulance. I watched them drive away, lights flashing, but no siren. Never a good sign. The next few hours were a blur of statements, photographs of my injuries, evidence collection, standard procedure for an officer-involved shooting. My sergeant drove me to the hospital to get my head wound stitched up and the marks on my neck examined. 6 stitches above my right eyebrow. The doctor said I was lucky. Another inch lower, and I might have lost the eye. I was still at the hospital when we got the news. Melissa Tompkins, age 40, no fixed address, had been pronounced dead at the medical center. 4 gunshot wounds to the chest. Despite the paramedics' best efforts, she'd lost too much blood. The investigation revealed what you might expect. She was homeless, suffering from severe schizophrenia, according to medical records they found. She'd been in and out of treatment facilities, but fell through the cracks of our broken mental health system. Toxicology confirmed high levels of methamphetamine in her system. The hotel staff said she'd wandered in that morning, talking to herself, becoming increasingly agitated as the day went on. I was cleared of wrongdoing. The dash cam from my cruiser showed part of the chase. Witness statements from hotel staff and guests corroborated my account. The department's use of force review board ruled it a justified shooting. I had been in imminent danger of serious bodily harm or death, but being legally justified doesn't make it easier to live with. I went back to work after 2 weeks of administrative leave and mandatory counseling. My colleagues try to be supportive, but I see the way some of them look at me now, the guy who killed a mentally ill woman. They don't say it, but I can feel it. I keep going over that day in my head. Could I have approached her differently? Should I have waited for backup? What if I hadn't fallen? What if I'd been faster, stronger, better trained? The department psychologist says I need to forgive myself, that I did what I had to do to survive. Maybe that's true. But every night when I close my eyes, I see Melissa Tompkins looking at me in that moment of clarity before she died. I wonder what she would have said if she'd had the chance. I wonder who she might have been if life had dealt her a different hand. I still work the same streets, answer the same calls, but nothing feels the same. I check and double-check my taser now. I work out more, trying to get back in shape. I take de-escalation training courses on my days off, but I know that none of it changes what happened that day. Nothing brings her back. Nothing washes the blood from my hands. Story 6. I'm still shaken up by what happened 2 months ago, but I need to tell someone. I've never been much for sharing personal stuff online, but I can't stop thinking about this, and I need to get it out. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what happened to me. I'm a pretty normal person, early 30s, work as a graphic designer from home. Last year was rough. My upstairs neighbors were renovating their apartment for 9 straight months. Constant drilling, hammering, and furniture dragging from 7 in the morning until whenever they felt like stopping. I complained to management, filed noise reports, even left them a note. Nothing helped. By spring, I was desperate for quiet. I decided I needed to get away somewhere completely isolated. No people, no traffic, no construction noise, just silence. I started looking for remote cabins online, but didn't want the typical tourist spots. After digging through some smaller rental sites, I found this A-frame cabin on the northern edge of Blackwater National Forest. Not the real name, but you get the idea. The listing had only 5 reviews, all positive, mentioning the peaceful surroundings and wildlife. The host, someone named Ray, advertised it as having spotty cell reception and no Wi-Fi, exactly what I was looking for. I booked it for 5 nights in early May. The drive took almost 4 hours from my apartment, with the last 45 minutes on increasingly rough dirt roads. My little Honda struggled, but I finally pulled up to the cabin around 4 in the afternoon. It looked exactly like the photos, a weathered wooden A-frame surrounded by massive pine trees. The forest was so dense around it that you couldn't see anything else but trees in any direction. The cabin itself was simple. Just 1 room with a propane stove, a hand pump for water at the sink, a stone fireplace, and a sleeping loft accessed by a wooden ladder. There was an outhouse about 30 feet behind the cabin. No electricity, but plenty of battery-powered lanterns. The place smelled like pine and old wood smoke, and I immediately felt relaxed. The quiet was incredible. I could hear individual birds and the wind in the trees. I unpacked my supplies and made a simple dinner on the propane stove. That first night, I built a small fire in the fire pit outside and just sat watching the stars come out. The sky was incredible. No light pollution meant you could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky. I remember thinking this was exactly what I needed. I slept better that night than I had in months. The loft bed was surprisingly comfortable, and the absolute silence was blissful. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows and birds singing. I made coffee, ate breakfast on the small porch, and planned a hike for the day. The hiking was beautiful. Ancient pines, moss-covered rocks, a small stream about a mile from the cabin. I didn't see another person all day. I took some photos, collected a few interesting rocks, and generally enjoyed being completely alone in nature. I felt myself unwinding for the first time in forever. That night, it started to rain. Just a light spring shower at first. I made dinner, read my book by lantern light, and climbed up to the loft around 10. The rain picked up, drumming on the cabin roof. It was soothing, and I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it, a distinct thump against the outside wall of the cabin. At first, I thought it was just a branch blown by the wind. Then I heard it again, more deliberate somehow. Thump, pause, thump, like something solid hitting the wood. I sat up in bed, suddenly very aware of how isolated I was. The thumps continued for maybe 2 minutes, moving around the perimeter of the cabin, then stopped. I lay awake for at least an hour after that, straining to hear any other sounds. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably just a curious animal, maybe a deer or even a bear, and managed to fall into an uneasy sleep. The next morning was clear and sunny, like the rain had never happened. I almost forgot about the strange noises until I stepped onto the porch and saw them. Footprints in the mud. Barefoot human prints leading up to the porch steps. They were odd. The toes looked unusually long, especially the big toe, which seemed to curve slightly. The prints came right up to the front door. Then, nothing. They didn't lead away. It was as if whoever made them had just vanished at my doorstep. I stood there for several minutes, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone had wandered up during the night, then backtracked in their own footprints. But why would anyone be barefoot in the woods, in the rain, at night? And how would they even find this place? The nearest cabin was supposedly miles away. I told myself I was overreacting. Probably just some hiker who got lost and was looking for help. Still, I made sure to lock the door that night, something I hadn't bothered with before. The second night was clear, no rain. I stayed up later, reading by the fireplace and trying not to think about the footprints. Around midnight, I banked the fire and went up to bed. I was almost asleep when I heard it, a slow scraping sound along the outside of the cabin, like something dragging itself against the wooden boards. It moved slowly, circling the cabin. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. It wasn't loud, but in the complete silence of the forest, it was unmistakable. I lay frozen in bed, hardly breathing. The scraping made a complete circuit of the cabin, and then stopped at what I was pretty sure was the front door. Then silence, complete silence. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I checked around the cabin but couldn't see any marks or scratches on the wood. Nothing seemed disturbed except a beer bottle I'd left on the porch railing was gone. It was just an empty bottle I'd been meaning to pack out with me. Not valuable at all, but definitely missing. I spent that day closer to the cabin, not wanting to wander too far. I explored the immediate surroundings, checking for any signs of visitors. About 50 yards from the cabin, I found what looked like a partial footprint pressed into some moss, just the front half with toes. The big toe was unnaturally long, longer than any human toe I'd ever seen. I took a picture of it with my phone, though the quality wasn't great. That afternoon, I seriously considered packing up and leaving early, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. I'd paid for 5 nights, and I didn't want my anxiety to ruin the trip. I decided to stay one more night, but I moved all my essential belongings back to my car, just in case I needed to leave quickly. The third night was the worst. I went to bed early but couldn't sleep. Around 1 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate steps. I sat up in bed, heart racing. The steps moved across the porch, then down the steps. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, but couldn't bring myself to look out the window. The footsteps moved around the cabin, then seemed to head toward the outhouse. I heard the door of the outhouse creak open, then close. I sat there, trembling, waiting. 5 minutes passed. 10. The outhouse door creaked again. The footsteps returned, but they sounded different, heavier somehow. They moved slowly around the cabin again, before stopping directly beneath the window near my loft bed. I could hear breathing, deep, wet breathing, like someone with congestion. It lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then silence again. I didn't move from my bed until dawn broke. As soon as there was enough light, I packed my remaining things. Before leaving, I forced myself to check the outhouse. I needed to know. The smell hit me first when I opened the door, like iron and rotting meat combined. The walls inside were smeared with something dark that I initially thought was mud. But it wasn't mud. It looked like blood mixed with something else, something black and viscous. There were handprints, if you could call them that, with elongated fingers and those unnaturally long thumbs. I didn't even close the outhouse door. I ran back to the cabin, grabbed my bag, and was in my car within minutes. As I drove down the dirt road, something caught my eye. Claw-like scratches on several trees near what looked like a game trail I hadn't noticed before. The scratches were about 7 feet up the trunk, higher than a bear could reach. I made it home that afternoon and tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was local teenagers playing a prank. Maybe a homeless person was living in the woods and using the cabin when it wasn't rented. But none of that explained those footprints, or that outhouse, or the breathing I heard. A few days later, I emailed the host, Ray, asking if there had been any reports of strange occurrences at the property. No response. I checked the listing again a week later, and it was gone, completely deleted from the site. I called the rental company, and they had no record of a cabin at that location or any host named Ray. I've tried researching local legends about the forest, looking up missing persons reports from the area, anything that might explain what I experienced. Nothing fits exactly, though there are stories about strange creatures in those woods going back to the early settlers. I've avoided camping or hiking since then. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear that scraping sound against my apartment wall. I still have that photo of the footprint in the moss, but it's so unclear that even I sometimes doubt what I saw. Whatever was at that cabin wasn't human. I'm sure of it. And sometimes I can't shake the feeling that it followed me home. Story 7. I've been putting off writing about this for almost a month now, but I need to get this off my chest. I can't sleep well anymore, and I keep thinking about what we saw out there. Maybe someone here has seen something similar or has an explanation, because this is seriously messing with my head. 4 weeks ago, me, Eric, Tyler, and Marcus decided to go on a wilderness trip in Colorado. We all worked together at this marketing firm in Denver, and with the summer heat getting unbearable, we thought it would be a good idea to escape to the mountains for a long weekend. We're all pretty experienced hikers, nothing extreme, but we've done plenty of overnight trips before. This time we wanted to really disconnect, you know? No phones, no GPS, just us, some maps and compasses, old school. We picked this remote area about 2 hours west of Denver. I'm not giving the exact location, partly because I couldn't pinpoint it exactly anyway, and partly because, well, you'll understand why soon. We parked at this tiny trailhead on Friday morning. It wasn't even a proper parking lot, just a widened area off this dirt road where maybe 3 cars could fit. We had about 40 pounds of gear each. Tents, sleeping bags, food, water, the usual stuff. The plan was to hike about 10 miles in, set up a base camp, then explore the area for a couple days before heading back. The first part of the hike was on a marked trail. Not many people use it, but it was clear enough to follow. As we got deeper into the forest, the trail started to fade. By late afternoon, we were basically following game trails and using our topo maps to navigate. It felt great being out there, away from everything. The forest was thick with pines, and every now and then we'd cross these little meadows full of wildflowers. Around 5 in the afternoon, we found a nice spot to camp. It was this flat shelf area below a rocky outcrop with good tree cover, but also enough open space for our tents. We set them up in a loose semicircle with a fire ring in the middle. After setting up camp, we got a fire going and passed around a bottle of bullet bourbon Tyler had brought, just talking, laughing, planning where we'd explore the next day. That night was perfect. Clear sky full of stars, cool mountain air, no worries. Saturday morning we woke up early, had some coffee and oatmeal, and packed day bags to explore. We decided to head west from our camp into an area that looked interesting on the map but didn't have any trails marked. We brought water, some trail mix, sandwiches, first aid kit, the basics. Left most of our gear at camp since we planned to be back by evening. The terrain was challenging, lots of ups and downs, fallen trees to climb over, dense pine groves to push through. We crossed a couple of small streams and these beautiful meadows that were turning golden with the season. It was tough going, but exhilarating too, you know? That feeling of being somewhere few people ever see. Around midday, maybe noon or 1 o'clock, we crested this ridge and spotted an animal trail following a dry gully below us. It looked like it might lead somewhere interesting, so we followed it downward. The trail wound through some trees, then suddenly opened into this clearing about 100 yards across. And that's where we saw it. In the center of the clearing was a cabin, not some modern hunting cabin or Forest Service structure. This thing looked ancient. Hand-hewn logs, darker than any wood I've seen, a roof that sagged in the middle, windows that were either broken or just empty frames. No door that I could see from where we stood. But the cabin wasn't what stopped us in our tracks. It was what surrounded it. There was this circle around the cabin, a perfect circle, maybe 50 feet from the structure in all directions, where everything just changed. The grass outside the circle was normal, green, waving in the breeze. Inside, it was yellow, patchy, like it had been scorched. The bushes outside were healthy. Inside, they were dried up, brittle. The most obvious thing was the sound. Outside the circle you could hear birds, insects, the rustle of leaves. Inside, complete silence. Not a single living thing made a sound in there. We stood at the edge of this circle, and none of us would step over the line. It was like our bodies just knew not to cross it. As we slowly walked around the perimeter, we started noticing the bodies. Small animals, squirrels, birds, even a couple of rabbits, lying inside the circle. They weren't decomposed or eaten by predators. They were dried out, like mummies, completely intact, but totally desiccated. "What the fuck is this?" Tyler whispered. None of us had an answer. Marcus pointed to a fallen tree that crossed the boundary line. The section outside the circle was normal, bark intact, green moss growing on it. The part inside the circle was gray, brittle, with the bark peeling off. The transition happened exactly at the invisible boundary line. We circled the entire perimeter, keeping our distance. The boundary was perfectly round, as far as we could tell. No variation, no breaks, just this perfect circle of death surrounding the cabin. I wanted to take pictures, but we'd left our phones back at the car. Part of me is glad we don't have photos. I don't think I'd want to look at them anyway, but part of me wishes we had evidence. "We should get out of here," Eric finally said, and nobody argued. We backed away, not taking our eyes off the cabin until trees blocked our view. We hiked for another hour before finally stopping to eat lunch, but nobody had much appetite. We barely talked as we ate our sandwiches. What was there to say? We'd all seen it, and none of us had any explanation. "Maybe it's some kind of chemical leak," Marcus suggested. "Like from an old mine or something?" "In a perfect circle," I countered. "And why would animals walk into it and die? Wouldn't they avoid it if it was toxic?" "Could be radiation," Tyler said. "Some kind of buried waste." But that didn't make sense either. Why would there be an ancient cabin built right on top of it? And again, the perfect circle was hard to explain. We spent the rest of the day hiking, trying to distract ourselves by exploring some other areas, but our hearts weren't in it. We kept glancing back over our shoulders, half expecting, I don't know what. When we got back to camp that evening, we sat around the fire and tried to make sense of what we'd seen. No one had a satisfactory explanation. We passed the bourbon around again, but the mood was completely different from the night before. The forest that had seemed so peaceful now felt oppressive, hiding secrets we weren't meant to find. "I say we head back tomorrow," Marcus said finally. "I'm not sleeping well out here after seeing that." We all agreed. None of us wanted to stay any longer. That night, I lay awake in my tent, listening to the forest sounds. Every time they quieted, even for a moment, my mind went back to that unnatural silence inside the circle. I kept imagining the cabin, wondering who built it and why, wondering what happened there. At first light, we packed up camp faster than I've ever broken down a site before. Hardly talking, just efficient, focused movement. We were on the trail by 7:30, moving at a quick pace. Nobody suggested taking a different route back or exploring more areas. We just wanted to get to the car and back to civilization. The hike out seemed to take forever, even though we were moving fast. Every game trail we crossed, every clearing we passed through, I couldn't help but wonder if we'd somehow circle back to that cabin. It was irrational, I know, but that's what fear does. We reached the car around 2 in the afternoon, threw our packs in the trunk, and drove back to Denver. The relief I felt when we hit paved roads again was overwhelming. In the weeks since then, I've done some research. I've looked up chemical spills in the area, mining activity, radiation, anything that could explain what we saw. Nothing. That region has no history of development, no mining, no military testing, nothing that would create something like that. I even emailed a forestry professor at CSU with a vague description, asking if any natural phenomenon could create such a distinct boundary of dead vegetation. His response was basically, "Not that I'm aware of." The four of us haven't talked much about it since getting back. When we see each other at work, there's this unspoken agreement not to bring it up. But I can tell it's affected all of us. Tyler, who used to organize these trips regularly, hasn't mentioned going hiking since. Marcus jumps at sudden noises now. Eric's been researching other jobs in cities, far from wilderness areas. As for me, I can't stop thinking about that cabin, about what force could create such a perfect circle of death around it, about whether that force is contained or spreading or waiting for something. We never went back inside the boundary. We never touched the cabin. We walked away. But sometimes I wonder, did we really get away clean? Or did we bring something back with us, something invisible that follows us now? I haven't been able to look at a perfectly round object the same way since then. Plates, clocks, the full moon, they all remind me of that boundary line. That perfect circle where life simply stopped. Story 8. I've been debating whether to share this experience for months now. Even typing this out makes my hands shake a bit. I'm not normally someone who gets spooked easily. I'm a corporate attorney who deals with high-pressure situations daily. But what happened to me last October has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about safety, solitude, and what might be out there in the woods. My doctor had been warning me for months about my stress levels. I hadn't slept properly in almost a year, managing maybe 3 to 4 hours a night, constantly waking up with my heart racing, thinking about case files and deadlines. "You need to completely disconnect," he told me. "No phone, no email, no clients. Just you and nature for a week." It sounded ridiculous at first. I hadn't taken more than 2 consecutive days off in 5 years. But after nearly passing out during a client meeting from exhaustion, I finally agreed to try it. My cousin Matt mentioned he knew someone with a cabin in northern Michigan they rarely used. "It's pretty basic," he warned, "but it's completely isolated, exactly what you need." He wasn't kidding about the isolation. After turning off the highway, I drove for 30 minutes down progressively narrower dirt roads. The GPS lost signal about halfway there. I followed printed directions, making turns at specific trees and rock formations until I finally found it. A small wooden cabin nestled among towering pines. The cabin was more weathered than I expected. The wooden exterior had grayed with age, and the small porch sagged slightly in the middle. Inside smelled strongly of pine and that distinctive musty odor old cabins get. It was simple. 1 bedroom with a double bed covered in what looked like homemade quilts. A main room with a wood stove, some mismatched furniture, and a tiny kitchen with a propane stove. The bathroom was basically a closet with a composting toilet and a sink that pumped water from a well. No shower, just an outdoor pump where you could fill a basin to wash. Despite the rustic setup, I felt an immediate sense of relief. The silence was intense, not the artificial quiet of my noise-canceling headphones, but a living silence filled with small, natural sounds, leaves rustling, distant birds, the occasional scurrying of something small across the roof. I unpacked my car, stocked the small refrigerator with the groceries I'd brought, and settled in. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I slept better than I had in months, waking naturally with the sunrise instead of to the blare of my alarm. I spent hours reading on the porch, taking slow walks through the surrounding forest and watching deer at the small clearing behind the cabin. At night, the darkness was absolute. No streetlights, no passing cars, nothing. Just an explosion of stars overhead that made me realize how much light pollution I lived with back home. On the third night, everything changed. I woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m. I remember checking my watch because the abrupt wakefulness was so strange. Something felt off. It took me a minute to realize what it was: the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of the previous nights, but a complete absence of sound. The crickets, the occasional owl, the rustling leaves, everything had just stopped. I lay there, suddenly aware of my heartbeat and breathing. That's when I noticed how unnatural the silence was. It felt heavy, like it was pressing against the cabin walls. After about 20 minutes of listening to absolutely nothing, I got up and looked out the window. The moon was bright enough to see the edge of the clearing, but nothing seemed out of place. Eventually, the crickets slowly started up again, and I convinced myself it was just one of those weird nature things. The fourth night, it happened. Again. This time, I was prepared. When I woke to that same suffocating silence, I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then movement caught my eye at the tree line, about 50 yards from the cabin. Someone was standing there, not moving, not approaching, just standing perfectly still, watching the cabin. They were too far away and it was too dark to make out details, but the shape was unmistakably human. I froze, uncertain what to do. I wasn't even sure if they could see me at the window. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, I flicked on my flashlight and shined it toward the figure. By the time the beam reached the trees, whoever it was had vanished. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, my back against the wall, facing the door. When morning came, I convinced myself I'd been seeing things. Stress, isolation, and an overactive imagination. That had to be it. But I couldn't shake the uneasiness. I hiked out to where I thought I'd seen the figure standing. The ground there was mostly moss, and in one spot it was clearly disturbed, compressed like someone had been standing in that exact location. I took photos with my phone, though I'm not sure why. Maybe just to prove to myself later that I hadn't imagined it all. The fifth and sixth nights passed normally. I slept through without waking, and the natural sounds of the forest continued uninterrupted. I started to relax again, thinking whatever had happened had been a one-off. Maybe a hunter or hiker had wandered by and gotten curious about the cabin. By the sixth day, I was almost enjoying myself again. I'd finished 2 books and had started feeling that mental clarity my doctor had promised. Then came the 7th night. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Not animal footsteps, these were deliberate, measured, human. The old boards creaked under the weight of someone slowly walking the length of the porch. I lay completely, still, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped at the front door. The handle rattled, just slightly, as if someone was testing it. Then the footsteps continued, moving around the side of the cabin. I could track the person's movement by the sounds, the soft thud against the exterior wall, like someone running their hand along the logs as they walked. They circled to the back of the cabin, where there was a second door leading from the kitchen. That handle rattled too, more forcefully this time. When it didn't open, there was a pause, then the footsteps continued around to complete the circuit of the cabin. Then they did it again, a second complete circle around the cabin, touching the walls, checking the doors. My entire body was rigid with fear. I wanted to look out the window, but I was terrified of being seen. After the second circle, the footsteps returned to the front porch and stopped. There was silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then nothing. No retreating footsteps, no sound at all. It was like whoever it was had simply vanished. I didn't sleep again that night. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I was up, throwing my belongings into my bag. I didn't even fold my clothes or pack properly, just stuffed everything in and zipped it shut. I was planning to be on the road within 30 minutes. That's when I discovered my car wouldn't start. The battery was completely dead, not even a click when I turned the key. It had been working perfectly when I arrived, and I hadn't left any lights on. Now it was just dead, in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service. I spent an hour trying to get it started, checking connections, looking for obvious problems. Nothing worked. With no other options, I grabbed my backpack with some water and snacks and started hiking back toward the main road. It was about 7 miles to the highway, according to my memory of the drive in. After walking for nearly 2 hours, I finally got lucky. A gas company truck came down the dirt road, and the driver stopped when I waved him down. He was skeptical at first, probably not used to seeing disheveled city guys emerging from the woods, but he let me use his phone to call a tow service. He even waited with me until they arrived, probably sensing how freaked out I was. When the tow truck driver arrived and checked my car, he gave me a strange look. "This battery didn't just die on its own," he said, pointing to the connections. "Someone disconnected it. See how the negative terminal is completely loose? That didn't happen by accident." A cold feeling washed over me. Someone had deliberately disabled my car while I was sleeping in the cabin. The same someone who had been watching from the trees, who had circled the cabin in the night, testing the doors. The tow truck driver must have seen my face because he asked if I was okay. I managed to mumble something about local kids maybe playing pranks. He didn't look convinced, but didn't press the issue. I never went back to the cabin. I've never told my cousin what happened, just said I had to leave early because of work. I keep telling myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe it was locals who don't like outsiders using the cabins. Maybe it was just someone messing with me. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that figure standing motionless among the trees. I think about those deliberate footsteps circling the cabin twice, testing each door. And I wonder, what would have happened if those doors hadn't been locked? What did they want? And why me? I still don't have answers. But I've started double-checking my locks at night, and I don't think I'll ever go to a remote cabin again. Some things you just can't explain, and some experiences change you in ways you never expected. This was definitely one of them. Story 9. I still can't sleep at night. It's been 3 weeks since that day in Whispering Pines Forest, and I keep seeing those scratched dates every time I close my eyes. I need to write this down somewhere, just to get it out of my head. Maybe then I can finally get some rest. It was supposed to be just a normal weekend camping trip. Nothing fancy, just me and my buddy Derek blowing off some steam after a hellish month at work. We'd been planning it for weeks. Grab some beers, fish a little, maybe hike some trails. Derek knows Whispering Pines pretty well, or at least he claimed he did. It's about 2 hours north of where we live. Not exactly remote wilderness, but far enough from civilization to feel like you're actually getting away from it all. We left early on Saturday morning in my old Ford F-150. It's not much to look at, but it's gotten me through some rough terrain before. Derek was in charge of navigation, which was my first mistake. He swore he knew a shortcut that would take us to this perfect secluded spot by a creek. Should have known better when he told me to turn off the main forest road onto this barely visible dirt path. "Dude, this doesn't look right," I remember saying, as branches scraped against the sides of my truck. "Trust me, Jake," Derek said, squinting at his phone. "Google Maps says there's an old logging road that cuts through here. It'll save us like 45 minutes. Google Maps. In the middle of nowhere with spotty reception. Brilliant." The road kept getting narrower and rougher. We were crawling along at maybe 5 miles per hour, the truck bouncing over rocks and roots. Then came that sound, that horrible grinding, clanking sound from underneath the truck, followed by a high-pitched whine from the engine. Shit! I slammed on the brakes and the truck shuddered to a stop. What the hell was that? We got out to check, and sure enough, something was seriously wrong. There was fluid leaking from underneath, and the truck made this sickening grinding noise when I tried to start it. Again. We were stuck, miles from the main road with no cell service. Derek kept apologizing, checking his phone uselessly. "We can't be that far from somewhere," he insisted. "Let's just follow this road on foot. It's got to lead somewhere, right?" It was either that or sit there and wait for someone to find us, which could take days. So we grabbed our backpacks with our water bottles, some energy bars, and basic supplies, and started walking. The forest got denser the further we went. It was early afternoon, but the tree canopy was so thick that it felt like dusk. The air was unnaturally still, too. No birds chirping, no rustling in the underbrush. Just our footsteps and heavy breathing as we trudged along. "Does this place feel off to you?" I asked Derek after we'd been walking for about an hour. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It's just quiet. Too quiet." Derek shrugged it off, but I could tell he was feeling it too. The way he kept looking over his shoulder, how he'd freeze at the slightest sound. We were about to turn back when we spotted it through the trees. A small cabin, the kind hunters might use as a base. It was set back from the path, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. If we hadn't been looking, we might have walked right past it. "Thank God," Derek exhaled. "Maybe they have a phone, or at least know how to get back to the main road." The cabin wasn't much, just a simple wooden structure with a small porch. No vehicles outside, no smoke from the chimney, but the door was slightly ajar, which seemed promising. Someone might be home. I called out as we approached. "Hello? Anybody there? Our truck broke down and we could use some help." No answer. Just that eerie silence that had followed us through the woods. We stepped onto the porch cautiously. The boards creaked beneath our weight. I pushed the door open wider, calling out again. Still nothing. "Should we go in?" Derek whispered. I hesitated. It felt wrong to just walk into someone's cabin, but we were in a pretty desperate situation, and the door was already open. "Hello?" I called one last time, then stepped inside. The air inside the cabin was stale and damp, with an underlying smell I couldn't quite place, something metallic and unpleasant. It was a single room with a wood stove in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a couple of sleeping bags spread out on the floor. No electricity, just a few battery-powered lanterns placed around the room. "Someone's definitely been here recently," Derek said, pointing to the wood stove. When I put my hand near it, I could feel the faintest warmth still radiating from it. On the table were several opened cans of beans and tuna, the contents half-eaten. Flies buzzed around them lazily. A couple of plastic water bottles also partially empty. A deck of cards spread out in what looked like a game of solitaire, abandoned mid-play. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Is anyone here?" The cabin was too small for anyone to be hiding. Whoever had been here was gone, but they'd left in a hurry. That's when I noticed the wall. It was covered in scratched markings, dates, written in a jagged, urgent hand, dozens of them going back months. And there, at the end of the sequence, was today's date. The scratches looked fresh, the exposed wood still lighter than the rest. "Derek," I said slowly, "look at this." He came over, his face paling as he saw what I was looking at. "What the hell? Why would someone—" "There's more," I interrupted, pointing to another section of wall where names had been scratched. At least 20 of them, with some crossed out. And below them, strange symbols I didn't recognize, curved lines and sharp angles arranged in patterns that made my skin crawl just looking at them. "We should go," Derek said, his voice tight. "This is too weird." I agreed, but something on the table caught my eye. A weathered leather journal partially hidden beneath one of the sleeping bags. I don't know why I picked it up. Curiosity? Some misguided hope that it would explain what we were seeing? The journal was filled with the same handwriting as the wall, cramped and urgent. Each entry started with a date that corresponded to one of the scratched dates on the wall. Below that were notes, sometimes just a few words, sometimes paragraphs. March 8th, 2 more gone, only 4 of us left now. The trees move at night. March 15th, saw lights in the forest again. Carl says they're just hikers. Carl is an idiot. April 2nd, Carl didn't come back today. Found his backpack by the creek. No blood this time. With each entry, the writing grew more frantic, less coherent. The last few pages were filled with the same symbols we'd seen on the wall, drawn over and over with increasing pressure until the pen had torn through the paper in places. The final entry, dated that day, was just 5 words. "They are watching us now." I dropped the journal like it had burned me. "Derek, we need to—" That's when we heard it. Footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate, coming up the path toward the cabin. More than one person. We froze, staring at each other in panic. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. "Is there a back door?" Derek whispered. I shook my head. There was a small window on the far wall, but it would be a tight squeeze. The doorknob turned slowly. We didn't wait to see who was coming in. Derek bolted for the window, yanking it open. I was right behind him. He got through first, then helped pull me out. We landed in a tangle of limbs and fear on the damp ground outside. "Run!" Derek hissed, pulling me to my feet. We crashed through the underbrush, not caring about the noise we were making or the branches whipping our faces. I glanced back once and saw figures standing at the window we'd just escaped from. I couldn't make out their faces, just dark silhouettes against the dim light from inside the cabin. We ran until our lungs burned, following what we hoped was the path back to my truck. Several times I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but when I looked back, there was nothing there, just the dense forest closing in around us. By some miracle, we found my truck right where we'd left it. It still wouldn't start, but we locked ourselves inside anyway, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" Derek managed between breaths. "Who were those people?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The image of those dates scratched into the wall. Today's date among them was burned into my mind. We sat in the truck for hours, jumping at every sound from the forest around us. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Derek suggested we try walking back to the main road. "It can't be more than a few miles," he said, though I could tell he was just guessing. Better than sitting here all night. We grabbed our backpacks again and set off, this time sticking to the logging road we'd driven in on. It was slow going in the fading light, but the thought of spending the night anywhere near that cabin kept us moving. It took 3 hours of walking before we finally reached the paved road. Another hour before a truck drove by and stopped to help us. The driver was an older guy named Bill, who said he worked for the Forestry Service. He seemed concerned when we told him our truck had broken down, but when I mentioned the cabin, his expression changed. "What cabin?" he asked sharply. "There aren't any cabins in that section of the forest." "We saw it," Derek insisted. "About an hour's walk from where our truck broke down. Small place, 1 room. Bill shook his head. "I've worked these woods for 23 years. There's no cabin out there." He drove us to the nearest gas station, where we called a tow truck for my Ford. While we waited, I went inside to grab some water and noticed the calendar behind the counter. The date matched what had been scratched into the cabin wall. The tow truck eventually retrieved my vehicle. The mechanic later said something had punctured the transmission, probably a sharp rock or branch on that logging road. It cost nearly $800 to fix, but that's not what keeps me up at night. It's the journal, the scratched dates, the footsteps. And it's what Bill said as he dropped us off at the gas station. He'd been quiet most of the drive, but as we got out, he looked at me with this strange expression. "You boys were in Shadow Creek Valley, weren't you? That's where your truck broke down." When I nodded, he sighed heavily. "You're not the first to see things that ain't there. Just be grateful you made it out." I've tried researching Whispering Pines and Shadow Creek Valley since then. There are some old news stories about hikers going missing over the years, but nothing conclusive. Nothing that explains what we saw. Derek refuses to talk about it anymore. Says we just stumbled onto some weirdo's hunting cabin and spooked ourselves. Maybe he's right, but I can't shake the feeling that we were meant to find that cabin. That our names might have ended up scratched on that wall if we hadn't run when we did. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my bedroom door. Story 10. I've never been the type to share personal stuff online, but I need to get this off my chest. What happened last October still keeps me up at night, and writing it down might help me process it. I was stupid and naive, and I'm lucky to be alive. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Me, Mike, Jason, and Dan had been swamped with midterms, and we needed a break before finals season hit us. Jason found this cabin rental online, super cheap for a weekend in late October. The listing showed this quaint little place nestled in the mountains near the state border. The photos looked decent enough. Rustic wooden structure, small porch, surrounded by trees. We were sold on the privacy. No neighbors for miles, the description said. That should have been our first warning. We left campus around noon on Friday. The drive took longer than expected because the GPS kept losing signal once we hit the mountain roads. The final 7 miles were on this narrow dirt road that twisted through dense forest. My old Honda Civic wasn't built for that kind of terrain, and I kept worrying we'd get stuck or blow a tire. Cell service disappeared about halfway up the mountain. We finally arrived around 4 in the afternoon. The cabin looked different from the photos. The online listing must have been taken years ago because this place was way more weathered than advertised. The dark wood exterior was faded and chipped in places. The 3 wooden steps leading to the porch creaked under our weight, and I remember thinking they might collapse if we all stepped on them at once. The property manager had left the key under a flower pot as promised. Inside, the cabin smelled of dry wood, dust, and old stone from the fireplace. It was small, just a main room with a kitchenette, a tiny bathroom, and 2 bedrooms with twin beds. The furniture looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. Well, it's not the Hilton, but it'll do, Jason said, always the optimist. We unpacked our stuff, brought in the beer cooler we'd filled with ice, steaks, and breakfast supplies, and Dan figured out how to light the old wood stove for heat. That first evening was actually pretty great. We grilled steaks on the small charcoal grill outside, drank probably too many beers, and played cards until after midnight. The isolation felt peaceful. No traffic noise, no neighbors, just the sounds of the forest and our own voices. We crashed around 1 a.m. with me and Jason taking the bedrooms and Dan on the pull-out couch. Saturday morning was chilly but clear. After a late breakfast of bacon and eggs, we decided to explore the area. The cabin had an old laminated map showing hiking trails, and we picked one that led to a small lake about 2 miles away. The hike was beautiful. Tall pines, fallen leaves crunching under our boots, occasional glimpses of the valley below. We reached the lake around 1 p.m. It was smaller than expected, more like a large pond, but the water was crystal clear. We skipped rocks and took some photos, then started heading back around 3 since none of us wanted to get caught in the woods after dark. About halfway back to the cabin, I heard a strange noise behind us, a distinct cracking sound, like someone stepping on a large branch. We all stopped. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. Jason nodded. "Probably just a deer or something." We continued walking, but faster now. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I turned to look behind us, I saw nothing but trees and undergrowth. But the feeling persisted. When we got back to the cabin around 4:30, everything looked normal at first. But as Dan walked around back to get more firewood from the small pile near the shed, he called out to us, "Hey guys, come look at this." Jason and I joined him behind the cabin. There in the soft earth were fresh boot prints circling the structure. They weren't ours. These were from someone wearing heavy work boots with a distinctive tread pattern. They went all the way around the cabin, stopping at each window before disappearing into the woods. "Maybe the property manager checked on the place this morning," Jason suggested, but his voice had that uncertain edge to it. "Without knocking, without leaving a note," I countered. "And why would they peek in every window?" Dan added. We stood there looking at those boot prints for a long time. The isolated cabin suddenly felt vulnerable, with its thin walls and windows that couldn't properly lock. We hadn't seen a single person since arriving, hadn't heard a car on the access road, nothing. "Let's just stay inside tonight," I finally said. "Keep the curtains drawn and lock the door." We went inside and locked up. The sun set early behind the mountains, and by 6 it was completely dark outside. We cooked dinner in near silence, each of us listening for sounds outside. The wind had picked up, making the cabin creak and the trees scratch against the roof. Each sound made us jump. We tried to distract ourselves with cards again, but our hearts weren't in it. Around 10, we decided to call it an early night. None of us wanted to sleep alone, so we dragged the mattresses into the main room and camped out there together. It felt childish, but also safer. I fell into a restless sleep, waking at every noise, the wind, the house settling, the occasional thump on the roof from falling pine cones. Around 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of Dan getting up. "Just going to the bathroom," he whispered when he noticed me watching. I dozed off again, but was jolted awake by Dan's hand on my shoulder. His face was pale in the dim light from the wood stove. "There's someone outside," he whispered. "I saw a face at the bathroom window." My blood went cold. The bathroom window was small and high off the ground. Someone would have to be deliberately standing on something to look in. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Maybe it was just a reflection." I know what I saw, Dan insisted. Someone was looking in at me. We woke Jason, and the three of us sat huddled in the middle of the room, listening. For nearly an hour, we heard nothing but the wind. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and we fell into uneasy sleep with the agreement that one of us would always stay awake to keep watch. I took the first shift, but must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, light was streaming through the windows, and Jason was shaking me awake. "The cooler's gone," he said, his voice tight with panic. I followed him to the front porch. Sure enough, our heavy-duty cooler, which had still been half full of beer and food, was nowhere to be seen. It was too heavy for an animal to drag away, and we'd locked the door last night. That was it. We'd had enough. Without discussion, we quickly packed our things, cleaned up the cabin, and headed for my car. That's when we discovered the battery cable had been cut. Not damaged, not worn through, cleanly cut with what must have been wire cutters. Someone had deliberately disabled our only means of transportation. "We need to get the hell out of here," Dan said, looking around wildly. "Like now." We had no cell service to call for help. The nearest town was about 10 miles away according to the map. With no other options, we grabbed our backpacks with water and some food and started hiking down the dirt road. We walked in silence, constantly looking over our shoulders. Every sound in the forest made us flinch. About 3 miles down the road, we heard the rumble of an engine approaching. We moved to the side, unsure whether to flag the vehicle down or hide. It was an old blue pickup truck driven by an elderly man with a weathered face and a gray beard. He stopped beside us, eyeing us curiously. "Car trouble?" he asked. We explained our situation, leaving out the part about the face at the window and focusing on the cut battery cable. The old man didn't seem surprised. He just nodded slowly and said, "You boys are lucky nothing worse happened. Hop in, I'll take you to town." The way he said it sent chills down my spine. Like he knew something we didn't. The ride to town was mostly silent. When I asked if there were many other cabins in the area, he just shook his head. "Not many folks go up that way anymore," was all he said. He dropped us at a small garage in town, where the mechanic said he could get the parts to fix my car by the next morning. We checked into the only motel in town, a rundown place with 8 rooms and a blinking vacancy sign. While waiting for dinner at the town's diner, I noticed a bulletin board near the entrance. It was covered with missing person flyers. Most were faded with age, but 3 were recent. All 3 people had disappeared in the forest within 20 miles of our cabin. I pointed them out to Jason and Dan. The waitress noticed our interest. "You boys staying up at one of the cabins?" she asked. When we told her which one, her face changed. She didn't say anything else, just brought our food and avoided eye contact for the rest of the meal. We got my car fixed the next day and drove straight back to campus. We didn't talk much about what happened for months. I think we all wanted to convince ourselves it was nothing. Maybe kids playing a prank or a random hiker who happened to pass by. Then last month, I finally reported the incident to the state police. I don't know why I waited so long. Maybe I didn't want to seem paranoid, or maybe I was trying to forget. The officer took my statement and called me back 3 days later. They'd sent someone to check out the cabin. In the shed behind the property, they found evidence that someone had been living there. Food wrappers, empty beer cans that matched our brand, a pair of work gloves, and a folding knife. The officer told me they'd found similar setups near other cabins in the area. They think someone has been targeting renters, watching them, intimidating them, and occasionally stealing from them. So far, They haven't connected this person to the disappearances, but the investigation is ongoing. I still have nightmares about that face Dan saw at the window, about someone watching us sleep, circling the cabin, cutting our battery cable. None of us go camping or hiking anymore. The wilderness used to be my escape, but now it feels tainted. What scares me most isn't the supernatural. It's knowing that a person was out there, someone who could approach while we slept, who was watching and waiting. For what, I still don't know, and I hope I never find out. Story 11. I've hesitated to share this for years. It sounds crazy, even to me, but I need to get this out because I can't make sense of it. And maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I grew up in a small town in Georgia where my mom and her sister, my Aunt Charlotte, were known for their stories. They had this way of telling them, eyes wide, voices dropping to whispers at the crucial moments, that made even the most ridiculous tales feel real. As a kid, I believed everything they said without question. As I got older, I started separating their stories into two categories: obvious folklore and things they swore actually happened to them. Most of their stories fell into the first category: ghost stories, local legends, the usual stuff people tell around campfires. But there were a few they insisted were real. The one that always got to me was about the woman at the water fountain. According to my mom, when she and Aunt Charlotte were 16 and 17, they were doing dishes one summer evening at my grandparents' house. The kitchen window faced the backyard where my grandfather had installed this ornate stone water fountain, the kind with a basin at the bottom where birds would come to drink. Mom said they noticed movement out there around dusk. When they looked closer, they saw a woman bent over the fountain, cupping her hands and drinking from it. At first, they thought it was a neighbor or someone passing through, which would have been weird but not terrifying. But then the woman looked up directly at them through the window. Mom always described her as having this unnatural paleness, with eyes that were all wrong, though she could never explain exactly what that meant. The part that really freaked me out was what happened next. According to Mom and Aunt Charlotte, the woman smiled at them. And then, this is the part I always struggled with, she shot straight up into the air and disappeared. Not like jumped, not like climbed something. According to them, she literally levitated vertically until she was out of sight. They called her the witch after that, though they never explained why they were sure she was a witch rather than some other kind of supernatural being. My mom would get this weird, distant look whenever she told the story, like she was seeing it all over again. For years, I brushed it off as an embellished memory or something they made up to scare me. I mean, people don't just fly away, right? But the consistency of their story over decades, the way they'd both get genuinely upset if I suggested they were exaggerating, it always left this tiny seed of doubt in my mind. That seed grew into full-blown terror last summer when I went to stay at my grandparents' old house. My grandparents passed away a few years back, but my family kept the house. It's this beautiful old colonial on the outskirts of town with a massive yard bordered by woods. Nobody lives there full-time anymore, but we use it for family gatherings and the occasional weekend getaway. Last July, I needed somewhere quiet to finish my thesis, so I decided to spend 2 weeks there alone. The first few days were perfect. The place was just as I remembered from childhood: creaky hardwood floors, faded wallpaper in the hallway, and that comforting smell old houses have. The backyard was a bit overgrown, but the fountain was still there, moss-covered and not working anymore. I'd catch myself glancing at it through the kitchen window while washing dishes, remembering Mom's story, then laughing at myself for being silly. Everything changed on my fifth night there. I'd been working all day and decided to take a break around 7 in the evening. It was still light outside, that golden hour when the sun hasn't quite set, but everything starts looking softer. I made myself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a splash from outside. My first thought was that a branch had fallen into the old fountain, but then I remembered the fountain hadn't worked in years. There was no water to splash. I got up and went to the window, not thinking much of it. What I saw made my blood freeze. The fountain was running. Water was flowing from the top tier down to the basin, sparkling in the evening light. But that's not what terrified me. Standing at the fountain, bent over with her hands cupped, was a woman. I couldn't see her face at first, just her back. She wore what looked like a long, dark dress that seemed oddly old-fashioned, but not quite period-specific. Just out of place in a way I couldn't define. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down as she bent over the water. For several seconds, I just stood there, unable to move. My rational mind started cycling through explanations. A neighbor, a lost hiker, someone from town who knew the property was usually empty. But deep down, I already knew. As if she could sense my thoughts, the woman straightened up and slowly turned toward the window, toward me. Her face, God, her face. My mom had said her eyes were all wrong, and now I understood exactly what she meant. They weren't a strange color or shape. They were normal human eyes except for how they looked at me, like she was seeing through my skin, past my bones, directly into whatever makes a person a person. Her skin was so pale, it almost seemed blue in the fading light. But her lips were dark, wet from the fountain water. When she smiled, I felt my legs go weak. It wasn't threatening exactly. It was knowing. Like we shared a secret I wasn't aware of. I must have made some sound, a gasp or whimper, because her smile widened. Then she raised one hand and beckoned to me with a single finger. "Come here," the gesture said. "Come outside." Every instinct in my body screamed danger. I backed away from the window, nearly tripping over a chair. I ran to the front door to make sure it was locked, then did the same with the back door and all the windows. The whole time I kept expecting to hear knocking or see her face pressed against the glass, but there was nothing. When I finally got the courage to look out the kitchen window again, she was gone. The fountain was still running though, water glistening in the near darkness. I called my mom, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. When she answered, I couldn't even form a proper sentence. "Mom," I gasped. "The woman, the fountain, she was here." There was a long silence on the other end. Then my mom said very quietly, "You need to leave that house right now, Lily." But I couldn't. It was almost dark, and the thought of going outside where she might be waiting was worse than staying inside with locked doors. I told Mom I'd leave first thing in the morning and asked her to stay on the phone with me. "Describe her," Mom said, her voice tense. When I did, she let out a small sound that might have been a sob. "That's her," she whispered, "exactly as we saw her after all these years." I spent that night huddled in my grandparents' old bedroom, lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the splash of water again, louder this time, like someone was playing in it. I didn't look. I couldn't. When dawn finally came, I threw my things into my car and prepared to leave. As I was doing a final check of the house, I noticed something on the kitchen floor I hadn't seen the night before. Wet footprints leading from the back door, which was now unlocked, to the middle of the kitchen, directly below the ceiling light. Then they just stopped. Not like someone had turned around and walked back. They just ended, mid-stride, as if whoever made them had suddenly risen straight up. I took a photo before running out of the house, barely remembering to lock the door behind me. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the fountain had stopped running again. It looked ancient and dry, just as it had when I'd arrived. I showed the photo to my mom and Aunt Charlotte later that day. Mom cried. Aunt Charlotte just nodded like she'd been expecting this all along. "We should have sold that house years ago," she said. "Why didn't you tell me it could be dangerous?" I demanded. "You made it sound like a weird thing that happened once." Mom wiped her eyes. "Because it did only happen once. To us. We never saw her again. We thought maybe we'd imagined it somehow, or exaggerated it over time." "But you always told the story the same way," I said. "You never changed the details." "Because we couldn't forget them," Aunt Charlotte replied. "Some things burn themselves into your memory exactly as they happened." I asked them why they thought she had come back after all these years. They exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. "She didn't come back," Mom finally said. "She's always been there. We just stopped looking." That was 3 months ago. I still have nightmares about her face at the window, that knowing smile, those eyes. Sometimes I dream about following her beckoning finger, going outside to the fountain, and what might have happened if I had. The thing that scares me most isn't just what I saw. It's that for my whole life, I thought my mom and aunt were exaggerating or misremembering or flat out making up these supernatural stories they told. The witch at the fountain, the mermaid in Florida that lured an entire family to their deaths, the thing that lived in my great-grandmother's cellar. But now I know at least one of those stories was absolutely true, which means the others might be too. And it makes me wonder what else is out there that we don't see because we've convinced ourselves it can't possibly exist. I haven't been back to the house. No one in my family has. But sometimes when I'm washing dishes at my apartment, I'll catch myself looking out my kitchen window, half expecting to see a pale woman with dark lips looking back at me, raising her finger to beckon me outside. And sometimes, just sometimes, I wonder what would happen if I followed. Story 12. I've always been a loner by nature, preferring the company of trees and stars to people. There's something about being alone in the wilderness that recharges me in a way nothing else can. Or at least, that's how I used to feel. It's been 8 months since my last solo camping trip, and I still break out in cold sweats thinking about what happened out there. This all went down last June. I'd been feeling particularly stressed at work. Endless deadlines, office politics, the usual soul-crushing corporate crap. I needed to escape, so I planned a 3-day trip to this remote spot I'd found about 3 hours from my house. It wasn't on any official maps or trails, just a forgotten logging road that eventually petered out near a small creek in the mountains. I'd been there twice before and loved it specifically because nobody else ever went there. No weekend warriors, no day hikers taking selfies, no loud families, just pure, untouched wilderness, the kind where you can actually hear yourself think. I remember pulling up to the end of this badly rutted dirt road on Friday afternoon. The sky was clear, temperature in the low 70s, perfect camping weather. I parked my truck, shouldered my pack, and hiked about a mile to this little clearing I remembered from my previous trips. It sat in a small basin near a slow, rocky creek surrounded by thick pine forest. The spot just felt right, protected, but with enough open sky to see the stars. Setting up camp was routine. I pitched my tent, gathered firewood, filtered some water from the creek. That first night was completely normal, peaceful even. I grilled some bratwurst over the fire, had a couple beers, and turned in early. The stars were incredible. I remember lying in my sleeping bag feeling that deep sense of contentment that only comes when you're miles from civilization. Saturday morning, I woke with the sun, made coffee and oatmeal, then decided to explore a bit. I'd never crossed the creek on my previous visits, so I thought I'd check out the terrain on the other side. I packed a small day bag with water, trail mix, and my first aid kit, then headed out. The creek was only about 15 feet across, easy to rock hop without getting wet. The opposite shore had denser vegetation, and the land rose more steeply into the hills. I followed game trails when I could find them, just wandering and enjoying being out there. I'd been hiking for maybe 2 hours when I heard it. The sound of heavy branches breaking, leaves crunching underfoot. Something big was moving through the forest, maybe 50 yards uphill from me. My first thought was bear or elk. We have both in these mountains. I stopped to listen more carefully. Whatever it was, the footfalls seemed too deliberate, too spaced out. Bears and elk move with a certain rhythm that just feels animal. This was different, slow, methodical, almost like a person, but taking exaggerated steps. I remember the hair on my arm standing up. I called out, "Hello?" thinking maybe it was another hiker, though that seemed nearly impossible given how remote this place was. No response, just more deliberate movement. I moved closer to the creek, wanting to keep it between me and whatever was up there. That's when I saw it, or thought I saw it. Just a glimpse through the trees, but it looked like a tall, upright shape moving between the trunks. Not an animal shape, more like a person, but tall and somehow wrong in proportion. The moment I tried to focus on it directly, it was gone. I told myself it was just tree shadows, my imagination playing tricks. But deep down, something felt off. That sense you get when you're being watched? It was overwhelming. I decided to head back to camp. The sun was high overhead by then, but the forest suddenly felt darker, colder. Back at camp, I tried to shake it off. I made lunch, read my book, even took a nap in the afternoon sun. But I couldn't completely relax. Every sound in the forest made me look up. Every breeze through the trees sounded like whispers. As evening approached, I built my fire bigger than necessary. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I wanted the light, the security. Dinner was freeze-dried pasta, eaten quickly while constantly scanning the tree line. I considered packing up and leaving then, but convinced myself I was being ridiculous. Plus, I didn't fancy navigating that logging road in the dark. I turned in around 10, zipping myself securely into my tent. Despite my unease, I eventually drifted off to sleep, the soft gurgle of the creek providing some comfort. Then came the moment that still haunts me. I woke suddenly, completely alert. The luminous dial on my watch read 12:07. I lay there, trying to figure out what had awakened me. There was no sound, and that was exactly what was wrong. The forest had gone completely, unnaturally silent. No insects, no night birds, no rustling leaves, nothing, except footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps outside my tent. Not the random wandering of an animal, but purposeful movement. Someone, something, was walking around my campsite. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps circled my tent once, paused at the entrance, then continued around again. The presence outside was taking its time, moving with confidence, like it owned the place and I was the intruder. I reached for my flashlight and knife, but couldn't bring myself to make a sound or unzip the tent. Some primal instinct told me to remain absolutely still, to pretend I was asleep. The footsteps continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only minutes. Then they moved away toward my cooking area. I heard subtle sounds of movement, my gear being touched, shifted. Not the frantic ransacking of an animal looking for food, but careful, almost curious examination. Then silence again, deep and absolute. I must have eventually fallen back asleep from pure exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through my tent walls. For a moment, I wondered if I'd dreamed the whole thing. Then I unzipped my tent. My campsite had been rearranged, not destroyed or ransacked, but methodically altered in subtle, disturbing ways. My hiking boots, which I'd left in the tent vestibule, had been turned around, now facing into the tent rather than out. My cooking pot had been moved from where I'd left it near my backpack to the opposite side of the fire ring. The food bag I'd hung from a tree branch was still hanging, but the knot had been retied in a way I never tie knots. I stood there trying to process what I was seeing when my eyes fell on the ground around my tent. Footprints, clear boot prints circling my tent exactly as I'd heard them do in the night. They weren't my prints. These were from a larger boot with a different tread pattern than mine. Someone had stood there watching me sleep. Someone had deliberately touched my things, rearranged them, just to let me know they could. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely roll up my sleeping bag. I packed faster than I ever have in my life, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. Whatever, whoever, had been there in the night was gone now, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed from the dense forest. I decided not to retrace my steps back to the truck. Instead, I followed the creek downstream for about half a mile, then cut across to intersect the old logging road closer to where I'd parked. It meant bushwhacking through denser vegetation, but something told me not to take the same path back. The whole hike out, I felt like something was pacing me just out of sight in the trees, not following exactly, more like escorting me out of its territory. I've never been so relieved to see my truck. It wasn't until I got home and started researching the area that I discovered a hunter had disappeared there 2 years earlier. The official report said he likely got disoriented and died of exposure, but his body was never found. I've spent countless hours trying to make sense of what happened out there. It wasn't a robbery. Nothing was taken. It wasn't a practical joke. Nobody knew where I was going. It was almost like a territorial display. Like whatever was out there wanted me to know that I wasn't alone, that I was being allowed to be there, not entitled to be there. I still camp occasionally, but never alone and never in remote places. My friends think I've gone soft, that I've lost my edge. They don't understand, and I don't try to explain it to them. How do you explain the feeling of something standing inches from your tent, watching you through the thin nylon while you pretend to sleep? Whatever was in those woods with me that night, it didn't need to hurt me to send its message. The message was clear. This is not your territory. You are not welcome here alone. And I listened. Story 13. I still regret taking that damn mirror shard. 2 years have passed, but I'm still dealing with the consequences. I'm not even sure why I'm writing this now. Maybe it's because last night was the worst it's ever been, and I don't know who else to tell. Nobody believes me anyway, but I need someone to know what happened in case something happens to me or Jamie. It all started in October, 2 years ago. Jamie and I were exploring the woods behind my house. We've been best friends since elementary school, and we'd spent countless afternoons wandering those woods, building forts, or just hanging out. But that particular day, we ventured deeper than we'd ever gone before. The trees were already mostly bare, with dead leaves crunching beneath our feet. As we pushed further into the woods, the sunlight struggled to break through the branches above us. I remember feeling a strange heaviness in the air, not humidity, but something else, like the atmosphere itself was denser there. "Look at that," Jamie said, pointing toward a large oak tree about 20 feet ahead of us. That's when we saw it, a broken mirror leaning against the trunk. It looked ancient. The frame was this dark, weather-beaten wood with intricate carvings that had been worn down over time. Most of the glass was shattered, with just a few jagged pieces still clinging to the frame. It was so out of place in the middle of nowhere. "Who would leave a mirror out here?" I asked. Jamie shrugged. "Probably some teenagers messing around." We approached it cautiously. I still remember how weird it felt to see our reflections fragmented across the broken pieces. My face looked distorted, stretched in some places and compressed in others. "We should take a piece," I said, not really sure why the thought even crossed my mind. "Like a souvenir." Jamie hesitated. "I don't know, man. That thing gives me the creeps." But I was already reaching for a shard about the size of my palm that had broken off completely. I picked it up, examining the way it caught the dim forest light. "Come on, it's just glass," I said, pocketing the piece. That was the first mistake. We didn't think much about the mirror after that. The shard sat on my dresser, collecting dust for weeks. But looking back, that's when things started to change. Small things at first. I'd wake up feeling like I hadn't slept at all, even after 8 hours. I'd constantly feel like I was being watched when I was alone in my room. Sometimes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, nothing would be there. Jamie started experiencing similar things. We didn't connect it to the mirror until much later. Fast forward to Halloween night that same year. Jamie came over, and we decided to go back to those woods. It was stupid, I know, but we were bored, and it seemed like a fun way to spook ourselves on Halloween. We brought flashlights this time since it was already getting dark. The woods felt different at night. The trees cast long, twisted shadows that seemed to reach out like fingers. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made us jump. We'd been walking for about 20 minutes when Jamie grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" Jamie whispered, pointing the flashlight beam toward a dense thicket of bushes. I squinted in the direction the light was pointing. "See what?" I thought I saw something move. We stood frozen, listening. The woods had gone silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Then I saw it too. A dark shape, low to the ground, about the size of a large dog, moving between the trees about 30 feet ahead of us. "Hey!" I called out, thinking it might be an actual dog that had wandered away from its owner. Jamie aimed the flashlight directly at it. What happened next still makes my skin crawl. The shadow stopped moving. Then it began to change shape. It started rising off the ground, elongating upward until it took the form of what looked like a man standing perfectly still. We were paralyzed with fear. The figure just stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it started walking toward us. Its movements were wrong somehow, too fluid, like it wasn't touching the ground. Jamie's flashlight beam was still directly on it, and without thinking, I blurted out, "Sorry for shining the light in your face." The figure froze mid-step. Then slowly, it turned its head toward us. I'll never forget what I saw next. Its face was pale, almost glowing in the flashlight beam. with features that seemed to shift and blur except for one thing, a smile that stretched literally from ear to ear, too wide for any human face. It held our gaze for a moment, that terrible grin never faltering. Then it turned and walked back into the woods, the darkness swallowing it within seconds. We ran all the way back to my house, not stopping once. We didn't talk about what we'd seen that night. I think we were both trying to convince ourselves it was just our imagination or a Halloween prank by someone from school. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The weird thing is, instead of staying away from those woods, we felt drawn back to them. About a week after Halloween, we returned during daylight. We told ourselves we were just going to prove there was nothing supernatural about what we'd seen. This time, we noticed something we'd missed before, a narrow path veering off from the main trail, barely visible among the undergrowth. It didn't look like a human trail. It was too narrow, and the way the vegetation was parted seemed unnatural, like something had pushed through rather than walked. We followed it for about a quarter mile until it just ended. There was nothing there, just more trees and undergrowth. No sign of where it was supposed to lead. On our way back, we passed the oak tree again, and there it was, the broken mirror, exactly as we'd left it. Except I could have sworn it was leaning against a different side of the tree than before. Jamie noticed it too. "Wasn't that on the other side last time?" he asked. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the afternoon warmth. For some reason, and to this day I can't explain why, Jamie reached down and picked up another shard. Maybe it was the same impulse I'd had the first time. Maybe it was something else influencing us. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I don't know," Jamie replied, studying the jagged piece. "It just feels like I should take it." As we made our way back to the trail, I started hearing things. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it sounded too deliberate, whispers coming from the underbrush around us. When I stopped to listen, they'd stop too. Then I'd hear the snap of a twig behind us, or the rustle of leaves where there was no wind. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Jamie. The color drained from Jamie's face. "Someone's following us." We practically ran the rest of the way out of the woods. By the time we reached my backyard, we were both breathing hard, not just from running, but from fear. That night, I had the first of what would become recurring nightmares. In the dream, I was lying in my bed, unable to move. My bedroom door was open just a crack, and through it, I could see a sliver of the hallway. A shadow passed by, pausing at my door. Then slowly the door began to open wider, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. But I could feel something watching me from that darkness, something with that same terrible smile. I woke up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat. The next day, Jamie called me, sounding panicked. "Dude, something weird happened last night." Jamie had experienced the exact same nightmare. Over the next few months, the paranormal activity increased for both of us. Jamie would call me in the middle of the night, terrified because the bedroom furniture had rearranged itself. I'd wake up to find all the faucets in the house running, or the TV on static at full volume. My parents thought I was sleepwalking or playing pranks. They even took me to a therapist who diagnosed me with anxiety. But how could anxiety explain the wet footprints I'd find leading from the bathroom to my bedroom when I was home alone? Or the whispering I'd hear coming from empty rooms? Jamie was having it even worse. The nightmares had gotten so bad that Jamie would scream in sleep. Jamie's parents could hear the screams from their bedroom down the hall. "They're watching me," Jamie would shout. "They're right there, watching me." Jamie's parents were seriously considering medication or even hospitalization. They thought it was some kind of psychotic break. I knew better. This was connected to those mirror shards. Whatever had been in those woods that Halloween night had followed us home. Last week, things escalated, dramatically. I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of something scratching at my window. When I looked, there was nothing there, but the scratching continued. I turned on my lamp, and that's when I noticed the mirror shard on my dresser was facing a different direction than I'd left it. As I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, my reflection in the shard began to distort. My face stretched and contorted until it wasn't my face at all anymore. It was that same terrible grin I'd seen in the woods. I called Jamie immediately, not caring what time it was. "It's getting worse," I said as soon as Jamie picked up. "I know." Jamie's voice was barely a whisper. "They're in my room right now." "What? Who's in your room?" "The shadows. They're standing in the corners watching me. They've been there for hours. I'm scared to move." "I'm coming over," I said, already pulling on my shoes. "No," Jamie hissed. "Don't come here. They might follow you. We need to get rid of the shards." We agreed to meet at the entrance to the woods at dawn. We would return the shards to where we found them and hope that whatever had attached itself to us would leave us alone. But when dawn came, Jamie didn't show up. I called and texted, but got no response. After waiting for an hour, I decided to go to Jamie's house. Jamie's mom answered the door, her eyes red from crying. "Where is Jamie?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "In the hospital," she said, her voice breaking. "We found Jamie this morning, unresponsive. The doctors don't know what's wrong. It's like Jamie is in a coma, but there's no medical reason for it." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. This was my fault. I was the one who had taken that first shard. I went back to the woods alone that day, determined to return both shards. I found the oak tree easily enough, but the mirror was gone. I searched the entire area, but there was no sign of it. In desperation, I left both shards where the mirror had been, hoping that would be enough. As I was leaving, I heard that whispering again, closer than ever before. I broke into a run, not looking back until I was out of the woods. When I finally turned around, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Standing at the edge of the trees was a figure, tall and unnaturally thin, with that same stretched smile. It raised one elongated hand and waved at me, as if we were old friends. That was yesterday. Last night I barely slept, jumping at every noise. This morning Jamie's mom called. Jamie had woken up, but something was wrong. Jamie was speaking in a language nobody recognized and wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. I don't know what to do. I can feel them watching me as I write this. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them in mirrors or windows, dark figures standing just behind me, always with those horrible smiles. They're getting closer. They're getting bolder. I think they're going to take me too, just like they took Jamie. And the worst part is, I still don't know what they want or why they chose us. Was it just because we took those pieces of the mirror? Or was there something else in those woods that day? Something that had been waiting for someone to come along? All I know is that I can hear them now, whispering my name from just outside my door. Story 14. I still can't shake what happened during our camping trip in the Catskills last September. I've always been an outdoorsy person, been camping since I was a kid, but this experience completely changed how I view wildlife, especially raccoons. My buddy Chris and I had been planning this trip for months. We both needed a break from work stress, so we picked a remote spot in the Catskill Mountains, about 3 hours from the city. The area was gorgeous. Tall pines, a creek nearby, and that crisp mountain air that just clears your head, you know? We arrived early afternoon on Friday, set up our tents, and spent the day hiking and fishing. Everything was perfect that first day. We caught a couple of small trout, cooked them over the fire, drank a few beers, and just enjoyed being away from emails and deadlines. The stars were incredible that night. You forget how many there are when you live in the city. We turned in around 11, both feeling relaxed and looking forward to a full day of hiking tomorrow. I woke up around 5:30 the next morning to what sounded like plastic rustling. At first I thought maybe it was just the wind, but then I heard distinct movement outside. I unzipped my tent slowly and peeked out. What I saw made me freeze. Our entire campsite looked like it had been ransacked. The trash bin we'd carefully secured with a heavy rock was toppled over, and our garbage was scattered everywhere. Our cooler was open, and food wrappers were strewn across the ground. My first thought was that maybe a bear had come through, which was terrifying enough. I woke Chris up, and we cautiously checked the area together. That's when I noticed something odd about how the trash bin had been knocked over. The rock we'd placed on top hadn't just been pushed off. It had fallen to the side where the bin had tipped. Looking closer, I realized there was a small hole dug underneath one edge of the bin. It hadn't been randomly knocked over. Something had deliberately dug under it to make it tip. "Raccoons," Chris said, pointing to some distinct paw prints in the soft dirt. "I've dealt with raccoons before on camping trips. They're annoying but usually predictable. They grab what they can reach and run off. This was different. This showed planning. We spent the next hour cleaning up and securing our site again. The more we examined the damage, the more unsettled I felt. The raccoons hadn't just grabbed easy food. They'd methodically gone through everything. Our backpacks had been unzipped. Granola bar wrappers were torn open, and there were tiny claw marks on our sealed container of trail mix. They'd even managed to open a screw-top container that held our coffee grounds. "They're just hungry animals," Chris said, but I could tell he was freaked out too. We reinforced our trash bin by placing it on a flat rock and putting 3 heavy rocks on top. We also moved our cooler between our tents and tied it shut with paracord. Everything else that might attract wildlife went into our cars. We tried to enjoy the rest of the day, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. While hiking, I kept thinking I saw movement in the underbrush. Twice I spotted raccoons in the distance, just sitting and watching us. Not running away, not foraging, just watching. Their eyes reflected intelligence that made my skin crawl. That night, we built a bigger fire than necessary. Neither of us said it out loud, but I think we both found comfort in the light and wanted to keep whatever was out there at bay. We stayed up later than planned, talking about nothing important, both reluctant to retreat to our tents. "They're just raccoons," Chris said again as we finally turned in around midnight. "Trash pandas, nothing to worry about." I smiled and agreed, but I kept my pocket knife within reach as I zipped up my tent. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up. The fire had died down to embers, and the night was completely silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. That unnatural silence is what pulled me from sleep. I lay completely still, straining to hear anything. That's when the scratching started. Gentle at first, almost hesitant, against the side of my tent. It moved slowly, deliberately, around the perimeter. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. I held my breath and reached for my flashlight and knife. The moment I moved, the scratching stopped. Immediately, like whatever was out there knew I was awake now. I called out to Chris in a harsh whisper. No answer. the scratching had, moved to his tent now. I could see his flashlight turn on, the tent glowing from within. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. "Yeah," I replied. "Don't open your tent." We sat there, both frozen in our respective tents, listening as the scratching continued. It would stop whenever we made any sound or movement, only to resume moments later. This went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Then came a sound that still gives me nightmares, a soft, almost human-like chittering, followed by what I can only describe as coordinated movement around our campsite. I risked peeking out my tent flap with my flashlight. What I saw makes me question my sanity even now. 5 raccoons were working in tandem around our trash bin. 2 were digging at the ground beneath it, while another seemed to be testing the weight of the rocks we'd placed on top. The other 2 were stationed as lookouts, watching the tents. When my flashlight beam hit them, they didn't scatter like normal animals. They froze, all 5 of them, and turned to look directly at me. Their eyes reflected my light, but there was something else in them: calculation, assessment. I quickly zipped my tent back up, heart pounding. I heard the animals move away, but not in panic. It was a controlled retreat. Neither of us slept much after that. We kept our flashlights on and talked in hushed voices until dawn finally broke. When we emerged from our tents, the trash bin was still upright, but the ground around it had been extensively disturbed. They had tried to tip it again, but couldn't get past our improved setup. However, they'd clearly spent significant time trying, systematically testing different approaches. The dirt around the bin showed evidence of their efforts: multiple holes dug at strategic points, claw marks on the rocks we'd used to secure it. But what really disturbed me was finding tiny handprints and scratches on both our cars, concentrated around the door handles and windows. It looked like they had tried to get in. "This isn't normal," I said to Chris as we examined the evidence in the morning light. "Raccoons don't work together like this, and they don't try car doors." "Maybe they've learned from campers," Chris suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "People leave food in cars, so they've figured it out." But we both knew this was different. This wasn't just learned behavior. This was systematic, coordinated, almost tactical. We didn't even discuss it. We both started packing up. We'd planned to stay another night, but neither of us wanted to experience another night of psychological warfare with these animals. As we dismantled our tents, I spotted movement in the trees. 3 raccoons were perched on branches about 30 feet away, silently watching us leave. Not foraging, not sleeping, just observing our departure. The entire drive home, we tried to rationalize what we'd experienced. Maybe they were unusually intelligent raccoons that had learned behaviors from frequent human contact. Maybe there was a rabies outbreak making them more aggressive. We came up with explanation after explanation, but none quite fit what we'd witnessed. It's been 3 months since that trip, and I still can't get those calculating eyes out of my mind. I've researched raccoon behavior extensively since then, and yes, they're intelligent animals with great problem-solving abilities, but what we experienced went beyond that. The coordination, the strategic approach, the way they tested our defenses and adapted their methods, it seemed almost human in its intelligence. I haven't been camping since then. Chris thinks I'm overreacting, but even he hasn't suggested going back to the Catskills. Sometimes I wonder if those particular raccoons had been exposed to something, chemicals maybe, or some experimental research facility nearby. Other times, I wonder if animals are just evolving faster than we realize, adapting to humans and learning our weaknesses, All I know is that I'll never again look at raccoons as just cute little bandits. There was something deeply unsettling about the way they worked together, the way they watched us, the way they seemed to think and plan. It was like they weren't just trying to get our food, they were studying us. And somehow, that scares me more than any bear or mountain lion ever could. I still have nightmares about those eyes, watching me through the darkness, waiting, planning, learning. Story 15. I've been working as a night dispatcher at our county's 911 center for almost 3 years now. It's about as rural as it gets out here, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and not much happens after dark. Most nights I'm just directing the occasional deputy to a drunk driver or sending an ambulance for someone's grandpa having chest pains. Nothing that would keep me up at night. Until 3 months ago. I was working the 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. shift with 2 other dispatchers, Megan and Dave. We were the skeleton crew, which was fine because nothing much happens at that hour anyway. Our center is in this old converted municipal building from the 70s. It's all cinder block walls, fluorescent lighting, and linoleum floors that squeak when you walk across them. Security's pretty tight. You need a badge to get through 4 different doors just to reach the dispatch floor, and we've got cameras covering every entrance. That night started like any other. I brought my usual thermos of coffee, settled into my station, and put on my headset. The first few hours were dead quiet. We'd had a couple of minor calls around 1 a.m., but by 3, the radio had gone silent. Megan was scrolling through her phone. Dave was doing a crossword puzzle, and I was just staring at my monitors, trying to stay awake. Around 3:30, I noticed Dave looking up at the windows that line the top of our dispatch center. These windows face the hallway outside, and you can see shadows pass by when someone walks through. "Did you see that?" Dave asked, pointing to the windows. "See what?" I replied, not really paying attention. "Someone just walked by in the hallway," Megan said, now also looking up. I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, right. You guys trying to freak me out again? We're the only ones in the building and all the doors are locked." They both insisted they weren't joking, but I didn't believe them. Last month they'd tried to convince me the building was haunted by making noises in the ceiling while I was alone in the break room. I wasn't falling for it again. About half an hour later, I was typing up a report when this sick feeling washed over me. It's hard to describe, like when you suddenly realize you've forgotten something important, but worse. My skin got clammy and the hair on my arms stood up. I glanced to my right, toward a desk about 15 feet away that nobody was using that night. For a split second, and I mean literally a split second, I saw something. Someone. A man crouched down, peeking around the edge of the desk. He looked rough, disheveled. I only caught him in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look directly at the spot, there was nothing there. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes. "Did either of you just see something by the empty desk over there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dave and Megan exchanged looks. "No," Dave said slowly, "but I've been feeling weird for the last 20 minutes, like someone's watching us." "Me too," Megan added. "I keep thinking I hear footsteps behind me." We all went quiet after that. I told myself it was just sleep deprivation and too much coffee. The midnight shift messes with your head sometimes, but the unease lingered, like a bad smell you can't locate. Around 4:15, I needed to use the bathroom. Our restrooms are down a short hallway, past the kitchen area. You have to badge out of the dispatch center, but the hallway itself is secure once you're in the building. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed overhead as I walked to the bathroom. There's a supply closet between the dispatch center and the restrooms that we keep cleaning supplies in. As I passed it, I noticed the door was standing wide open. I distinctly remembered it being closed when I arrived for my shift. It always is. I used the bathroom quickly, trying to shake off my growing uneasiness. As I was washing my hands, I heard what sounded like a cabinet closing in the kitchen area. I dried my hands and stepped back into the hallway. That's when I saw him. Standing by the kitchen door was a man. Not a co-worker, not a deputy, not anyone who belonged there. He was medium height with brownish hair and some facial hair. Not a full beard, more like he hadn't shaved in several days. He wore a green jacket, like an old army field jacket. But what I remember most clearly was his face. It was bloody, not gushing blood, but smeared with it, like he'd been in a fight. His eyes were fixed on me, but he wasn't moving. I froze. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. Then I blinked, and he was gone. Not like he walked away. He was just gone. I ran back to the dispatch center, fumbling with my badge to get through the door. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because both Dave and Megan jumped up when I came in. "What happened?" Dave asked. I told them what I'd seen. They immediately wanted to check the security cameras, but I was hesitant. Part of me didn't want to know if there was actually someone in the building with us. The other part was afraid the cameras would show nothing, and I'd have to face the possibility I was losing my mind. Before we could decide what to do, the radio on all three of our headsets activated. For about 10 seconds, we heard what sounded like heavy breathing and some kind of grunting. Then silence. The weird thing was, nobody had keyed up their radio. The transmission came through on a channel that deputies use for backup calls, but the computer showed no unit had activated their mic. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Dave immediately called the sergeant on duty. "Sarge, did you just key up your radio? We got a strange transmission." "Negative," came the reply. "I'm at the gas station grabbing coffee." "What kind of transmission?" Dave explained, and the sergeant said he'd swing by to check things out. When he arrived about 15 minutes later, we all felt a bit better. He walked through the entire building with his hand on his gun, checking every room, closet, and possible hiding place. He found nothing. No doors or windows breached, no sign anyone had gotten in. "The building's secure," he told us. "Maybe one of your radios is malfunctioning. I'll have the techs look at them tomorrow." After he left, we tried to go back to normal, but none of us could shake the feeling something was off. We stuck together for bathroom breaks after that, and when our shift ended at 11, we all practically ran to our cars. I convinced myself it was just a weird night. Maybe I dozed off for a second and dreamed the man in the hallway. Maybe the radio transmission was just interference. I almost had myself believing it until the next week when things got worse. Lights started turning on by themselves in empty rooms. Doors we'd closed would be open when we returned. Sometimes we'd walk into the break room and gag from a sewage smell that would disappear as quickly as it came. One night, all three of us heard laughter coming from the basement where the old records are kept. The radio transmissions continued too, sometimes just breathing, sometimes what sounded like someone trying to talk, but only managing to produce guttural sounds. The worst was when a crystal clear voice came through one night asking, "Are you there?" And 2 nights later, "Please come back." Tech services checked our radios repeatedly. They found nothing wrong. IT reviewed our security camera footage, but never caught anything unusual. The cameras would sometimes glitch for a few seconds, just static, but that was explained away as equipment issues. 3 weeks after my encounter in the hallway, another dispatcher named Rob, who works the shift before mine, asked if he could talk to me privately. "This is going to sound crazy," he said, pulling out his phone. "But does this guy look familiar to you?" He showed me a photograph that made my blood run cold. It was him, the same man I'd seen that night. Same brownish hair, same scraggly facial hair, same green jacket. The only difference was that in this photo, his face wasn't bloody. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my mouth dry. "It's from an old case file. I've been doing some research on the history of this building." Rob lowered his voice. "This guy was murdered in 1984, just 2 blocks from here. He was beaten to death in a bar fight. They never caught who did it." I couldn't speak. How could I have seen someone who died decades before I was even born? The activity has only escalated since then. All of us who work nights have experienced something. Footsteps in the hallways when no one's there. The sound of someone walking in the attic above us. Sinks and toilets turning on by themselves. The worst is the sounds, painful moans and sometimes screams that echo through the building in the dead of night. Last week, I was alone in the kitchen area making coffee when I felt someone standing right behind me. I could feel their breath on my neck. When I turned around, I saw him again, the man in the green jacket. This time, his face wasn't just smeared with blood, it was bashed in, one eye swollen shut, nose clearly broken. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but all that came out was a wet, gurgling sound. Then he was gone. I've requested a transfer to day shift, but so have half the night dispatchers, so I'm still waiting. In the meantime, we're never alone in the building. We travel in pairs, even to the bathroom. We've tried sage, prayers, and one dispatcher even brought in holy water from her church. Nothing helps. The thing that keeps me up during the day when I should be sleeping is the look in his eyes. He doesn't seem angry or menacing. He looks desperate, like he's trying to tell us something. I just don't know what it is, and I'm not sure I want to find out. Story 16. I still can't sleep some nights. It's been 3 years since it happened, but certain calls stick with you in this job. This one haunts me more than any other. It wasn't my first death. That happened during my ride-alongs in training. But this one was different. I'd only been a certified paramedic for 3 weeks. Fresh out of the academy with my crisp uniform and shiny badge, thinking I was ready to save lives. My partner Rick had been doing this for 15 years. He'd seen everything, or so he told me. The kind of guy who could eat a sandwich right after cleaning brain matter off his boots. I admired that detachment then. Now I understand it was just his way of coping. It was a Wednesday evening shift in Richmond. We'd had a steady day. 2 chest pains, a broken ankle, and an old lady who just needed help getting back into bed. Nothing major. We were parked at the gas station on Maple, Rick telling me some story about a guy who got his hand caught in a meat grinder when the call came through. Domestic assault, possible stabbing, 1422 Cedar Lane, apartment 3B. I remember feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was the real deal, a proper emergency. Rick just sighed, tossed his coffee cup and said, "Let's roll, rookie." The drive there took 5 minutes. I kept mentally reviewing my training for stab wounds. Control bleeding, pressure, dressings, rapid transport, blood products. Simple, right? Nothing in training prepares you for the reality. The police were already on scene when we arrived. 2 cops in the parking lot with a skinny, pale guy in handcuffs. He was twitching and muttering to himself, eyes darting everywhere. One of the cops nodded toward the building. "Apartment 3B, it's bad." The smell hit me first when we entered the apartment building. That copper penny smell of blood. Lots of it. The door to 3B was wide open. Another officer stood just inside, looking green. "In the living room," he said. Jesus Christ. I've never seen so much blood in one place. It was everywhere, pooled on the beige carpet, splattered up the walls, smeared across the coffee table. And in the middle of it all was a young woman. She couldn't have been older than me. 22, we later found out. Carla Johnson. She was lying on her back, wearing pink pajama shorts and a white t-shirt that was now completely red. I counted at least a dozen stab wounds immediately visible on her chest, abdomen, and neck. The knife, a standard kitchen knife with a black handle, was still embedded in her upper abdomen. I'll never forget how the handle looked, slick with blood, slightly trembling with each desperate breath she took. Jesus, Rick muttered next to me. That's when I knew it was bad. When Rick swore, it meant things were serious. We dropped our bags and got to work. The shocking part was that she was still conscious. Her eyes were open, tracking us as we moved around her. Training kicked in, and we cut away her clothes, started large-bore IVs in both arms, packed wounds where we could, and left the knife in place to prevent further bleeding. "Carla, can you hear me?" Rick asked as he applied pressure bandages. "We're going to help you. Stay with us." Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out, just a bubble of blood. "Blink if you can hear me," I said, hanging a bag of fluids wide open. She blinked. Somehow, despite everything, she was fighting. The police officer filled us in while we worked. Her name was Carla Johnson. Her boyfriend, Lee Whitman, had stabbed her during an argument over a text message on her phone. Neighbor called 911 when they heard screaming. Lee was high on something, meth probably, given his appearance. He'd stabbed her 22 times, once for each year of her life. Just a kid, really. A kid drowning in her own blood because some twitchy junkie thought she was texting another guy. Moving her to the stretcher was a nightmare. The floor was so slippery with blood that I nearly fell twice. Her blood-soaked body made the backboard slick, and we struggled to secure her. Time was ticking away, and I knew every second counted. "We need to move," Rick said, his voice steady but urgent. "She's circling the drain." The 12-minute drive to Memorial Hospital was the longest of my life. We called ahead so they'd be ready. Trauma team activated, blood products on standby. Rick drove while I stayed in the back with Carla. Her vitals were tanking, blood pressure barely registering, heart rate through the roof, oxygen saturation dropping despite the mask. Her skin was getting colder by the second, turning that ashen gray color they warn you about in school. But you don't really understand until you see it. I kept the fluids going, squeezing the bags to force them in faster, knowing it wasn't enough. She needed blood, surgery, a miracle. All I could do was hang on for those 12 minutes. "Carla," I said, leaning close to her ear as I adjusted the oxygen mask. "The hospital is just a few minutes away. They're waiting for you. Just hold on a little longer." Her eyes found mine. So much fear in them, but also something else, hope. She believed me. She believed that if she just held on, we could save her. That's what kills me to this day. She trusted us. About 7 minutes into the transport, she crashed. Her heart stopped. I started CPR immediately, leaving. Bloody handprints all over her chest as I compressed. We got her back after 2 rounds of epi, but her pulse was thready, barely there. "We're losing her," I called to Rick. 3 minutes out, he yelled back. I remember talking to her the whole time, even though she was unconscious, telling her to fight, to hold on, that help was waiting. Her blood was everywhere, soaking my pants, my sleeves pooling on the ambulance floor. The smell was overwhelming, metallic and thick. We pulled into the ambulance bay at Memorial exactly 12 minutes after leaving her apartment. The trauma team was waiting, a swarm of blue scrubs and determined faces. We rattled off the report as we wheeled her in. 22-year-old female, multiple stab wounds, CPR in progress, 2 rounds of EPI, massive blood loss. They took over smoothly, a well-oiled machine of medical expertise. I stepped back, suddenly useless, watching them work. A nurse cut away our pressure bandages. A doctor carefully removed the knife that had remained embedded in her abdomen. Another started a central line. They pushed blood products, medications, called for immediate OR prep. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, they could save her. They were doing everything right, everything possible. I allowed myself to hope, just like Carla had. Rick put his hand on my shoulder. "Come on, kid. We need to clean up and restock." I nodded numbly and followed him back to the ambulance. The stretcher was drenched in blood. The floor had bloody footprints and small pools where fluid had collected. The equipment bags were smeared with red handprints, my handprints. It looked like a slaughterhouse. We were halfway through cleaning when a young doctor, he couldn't have been more than 30, came out to the bay. I knew what he was going to say before he opened his mouth. His face said it all. "She coded again on the table," he said quietly. "The injuries were too extensive. We couldn't bring her back this time. I'm sorry." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The doctor hesitated, then added, "You guys did everything you could. She never had a chance with that many wounds. But she did have a chance in her mind for those 12 minutes, because we made her believe she did." Finishing the cleanup was surreal. I watched Carla's blood congeal on the stretcher as I scrubbed it away. Dark red turning to brown, becoming sticky, then flaking off. Parts of her literally going down the drain. We replaced the soiled linens, restocked our supplies, and went back in service. There were other calls to take, other people who needed help, but I couldn't shake it. For days afterward, I could still smell her blood in the ambulance, no matter how much disinfectant we used. It seemed to have seeped into the crevices of the equipment, into the fabric of the seats, into me. I kept thinking about those 12 minutes, how we worked so hard to save someone who couldn't be saved, how we gave her hope when there was none. Was that mercy or cruelty? I still don't know. 3 years later, I'm still a paramedic. I've seen more death, more trauma, more human suffering than I ever thought possible. I've saved lives too, which helps balance the scales somewhat. But I still think about Carla Johnson. Not because she died, death is part of this job. Not even because of the brutality of her murder or her youth. I think about her because for 12 minutes, I made a dying woman believe she might live. I watch her eyes in my dreams, trusting me as I told her to hold on just a little longer, giving her hope that slipped away in an operating room while I cleaned her blood off my boots. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been kinder to let her go peacefully in that blood-soaked living room, rather than subjecting her to 12 more minutes of desperate, painful struggle. 12 minutes of false hope. They don't teach you that in paramedic school, how to live with the weight of the hope you give to the dying. How to scrub away, not just the blood, but the memory of eyes that trusted you to deliver on promises you had no right to make. Story 17. I still can't explain what happened to us last month in the Ridgecrest Mountains. I've tried talking to local authorities, searched online for similar experiences, even considered that I might have been imagining things. But my partner saw it too. And what we found later, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'd been planning this getaway for months. Both of us had been working non-stop since January, and by May we were desperate for some peace and quiet. No internet, no meetings, no constant notifications. Just us, some books, hiking trails, and absolutely nothing else. We found this cabin on one of those vacation rental sites. Not super fancy, but secluded enough that the listing actually warned about spotty cell service, which was exactly what we wanted. The drive up was beautiful. 4 hours from the city, the last hour on these narrow, winding roads that snaked through dense pine forest. The rental was about 20 minutes from the nearest small town, Shadow Pine Ridge, population like 800 people. Our cabin was set pretty far back from an unpaved Forest Service road. There were these occasional wider spots every quarter mile or so where cars could pull over to let others pass, since the road wasn't wide enough for 2 vehicles in most places. We arrived around 3 in the afternoon on a Friday. The place was exactly what we expected, rustic but clean, with a decent kitchen, a fireplace, and a porch with 2 Adirondack chairs facing the woods. We unpacked, made dinner, cracked open some wine, and just sat on that porch watching the trees until it got dark. Perfect first day. The next morning, we decided to explore some of the trails near the cabin. We drove about 2 miles down the road to a trailhead we'd spotted on the way in. That's when I first noticed the truck. It was parked in one of those pull-offs, an older model Ford pickup, red but faded, with visible dents on the passenger side door and a busted right taillight. I only really registered it because the pull-out seemed like an odd place to leave a vehicle. It wasn't near any obvious trail or landmark, just a random spot on the road. We hiked for about 3 hours, looping back to our car around noon. The truck was gone when we passed that spot again, which made sense. Someone had probably just stopped for a bit and continued on. After lunch back at the cabin, we decided to drive into town for some groceries and maybe grab coffee. About a mile from our cabin, in the opposite direction from where we'd seen the truck earlier, there it was again. The same red Ford pickup parked in another pullout. I know it was the same one, same dents, same busted taillight, even the same license plate. I'd noticed it earlier because it had one of those custom frames around it that was rusted to hell. "Wasn't that the same truck we saw this morning?" my partner asked. I nodded, slowing down slightly as we passed. The truck was empty. No one inside or around it that I could see. "Weird place to park," I said. "Maybe they're hiking." But there weren't any obvious trail markers nearby, and we hadn't seen anyone on our own hike earlier. Still, I didn't think too much about it then. The mountains are full of locals who know spots tourists don't. We went to town, spent a couple hours there grabbing supplies and coffee, chatting with some locals at the cafe. Nobody seemed off or weird, just the usual small-town friendliness. We headed back to the cabin around 4 in the afternoon. On our way back, the truck was gone from the second spot, but about half a mile from our cabin turnoff, there it was again. This time it was parked at a pullout that was even closer to our cabin. The driver's door was open, but again, nobody visible. "Okay, that's getting a little strange," my partner said, voicing what I was thinking. Why would someone keep moving their truck to different spots along this road? Maybe they're working, Forest Service or something, I suggested, but I didn't believe it. The truck didn't have any official markings, and it looked too beat up to be a government vehicle. We continued to our cabin, both of us glancing back as we turned onto our access road. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. That evening, I tried to distract us by cooking a nice dinner. We opened another bottle of wine, but the conversation kept coming back to the truck. Why was it getting progressively closer to our cabin? Why was the door open but no one around? It didn't make sense. Around 8 that night, I stepped outside to get more firewood from the stack at the side of the cabin. The sun was just setting, creating that weird half-light where shadows play tricks on you. I found myself scanning the tree line, feeling uneasy. As I rounded the corner of the cabin with an armful of logs, I froze. There, just at the edge of the trees about 50 yards from our cabin, was the red truck. It wasn't on the road now. It had been driven between the trees, partially obscured by pines, with its front end facing our cabin. The driver's door was still open. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I dropped the firewood and rushed back inside, locking the door behind me. "The truck is here," I told my partner, my voice cracking. "It's in the woods, watching the cabin." "What? Are you serious?" We turned off all the lights and carefully peeked out the window. From that angle, we could just make out the dull red of the truck's body between the trees. The open door was a dark rectangle against the forest backdrop. "Should we call someone?" my partner whispered. I pulled out my phone. No service, of course. The landline, I remembered. The cabin had an old corded phone for emergencies. I picked it up and got a dial tone, then called the local sheriff's department. It took them forever to answer, and when they did, the deputy didn't seem overly concerned. "Probably just locals," he said. "We get a lot of hunters and foragers up there. They know the area better than you might think." "But why would they park and watch our cabin?" I pressed. "Can't tell you that. But unless they've made threats or come onto your property, there's not much we can do. You want me to send someone to check it out?" I did, but he said it would be at least 2 hours before anyone could get there. The department was small, and they had a situation in town. I thanked him and hung up. We spent the next few hours sitting in the dark, taking turns watching the truck through the window. It never moved. No one ever emerged from the forest or got into it. The door just stayed open, like some kind of invitation or warning. Around midnight, we decided one of us should try to sleep while the other kept watch. Neither of us actually did sleep, though. The cabin creaked and groaned all night in the wind, each sound making us jump. At first light, I looked out the window again. The truck was gone. "That's it," my partner said. "We're leaving today." I agreed. We were supposed to stay 2 more nights, but there was no way we could enjoy our time there now. We packed quickly, cleaning the cabin as required, but rushing through it, constantly glancing out the windows. By 10 in the morning, we were ready to go. I did one final walk-through of the cabin while my partner loaded the last bags into our car. When I stepped outside to lock up, I noticed something on the porch railing. A small carved wooden figure, about 3 inches tall, shaped like a crude human form. It hadn't been there the day before. I'm certain of that. I showed it to my partner, who looked even more freaked out than I felt. "Let's go." "Now," was all they said. We got in the car and started down our access road. When we reached the main forest road, there was the truck again. This time it was parked directly opposite our turnoff. The door was closed now. I slowed down, hesitating. "Don't stop," my partner said urgently. "Just drive." As we passed the truck, I looked more carefully at it. The interior was filled with what looked like garbage, old food wrappers, papers, empty bottles. The dashboard was covered in more of those small wooden figures, like the one we'd found on our porch. dozens of them, all facing outward like tiny sentinels. And there was something else, photographs taped to the dashboard and visors. From the quick glimpse I got, they appeared to be photos of cabins, different cabins taken from a distance, through trees. We drove straight out of Shadowpine Ridge without stopping. I called the rental company later that day to explain why we'd left early, but they didn't seem particularly surprised or concerned. They offered a partial refund for the unused nights, which I took. A week later, I filed a report with the county sheriff's department. The deputy I spoke with took down all the details, including the license plate number I'd memorized, but I never heard anything back. 2 weeks after that, I was scrolling through a hiking forum looking for a new vacation spot when I came across a post from 3 years ago. Someone described staying in a cabin in the Ridgecrest Mountains and being watched by a red Ford pickup that kept appearing in different locations around their rental. They never saw the driver, but found similar wooden figures left near their property. The post had no responses. When I tried to message the user, I found the account had been deleted. I still have the wooden figure. I've thought about throwing it away many times, but something stops me. Sometimes at night, I wake up thinking I hear a car door closing outside our apartment. I get up and check the street, half expecting to see that red truck parked there, door open, waiting. I don't know who was driving that truck or why they were watching us. I don't know what would have happened if we'd stayed another night, but I'm certain of one thing. We were not welcome in those woods, and whoever was in that truck wanted us to know it. Story 18. I've been sitting on this experience for almost 7 months now. I've told exactly one person, my brother, who told me I should post about it online, maybe get some perspective from people who've been through similar things. So here goes. Last October, me and 2 of my oldest friends, Tyler and Chris, decided to take a weekend trip to a cabin in the Appalachians. We've known each other since college, but life got in the way, like it always does. Tyler got married, Chris moved across the state for work, and I've been drowning in my job at the marketing firm. It had been almost 2 years since all 3 of us were together in the same place. Chris found this rental cabin online, super cheap for a 4-day weekend. The listing had these gorgeous photos of an old wooden cabin tucked between 2 ridges, completely surrounded by trees. It looked perfect. No neighbors, no cell service, just us and nature. The kind of place where you can actually see the stars at night. The drive there took longer than expected. The GPS died about 30 minutes after we turned off the highway onto these increasingly narrow country roads. We had printed directions as backup, thankfully, but by the time we were on the final stretch, this dirt road barely wide enough for my Subaru, it was already getting dark. The road to the cabin was rough as hell. It hadn't rained in weeks, so dust was kicking up everywhere, coating the windshield. The trees on either side were so dense they formed this tunnel effect, with branches occasionally scraping against the car. I remember thinking how isolated it felt already, and we weren't even at the cabin yet. We pulled up around 6 in the evening. The cabin was exactly like the photos. This ancient-looking 2-story wooden structure with a small porch out front. The wood was this dark, weathered gray that made it look like it had been there for 100 years. Maybe it had. Tyler had brought a cooler full of beer and steaks, and Chris was in charge of breakfast stuff and snacks. I'd packed a bunch of board games and cards. We were all pretty excited to just hang out, drink beer, and not think about work for a few days. That first night was great. We grilled the steaks on this rusty old charcoal grill we found on the porch, drank beer, played cards, and caught up. It felt like old times. We stayed up late, talking around the fireplace inside. It wasn't until everyone else went to bed and I stepped outside for a last cigarette that I noticed something odd. There was this complete silence. I mean, total absence of sound. No crickets, no distant owls, nothing rustling in the underbrush. Just dead quiet. I've been camping plenty of times and forests are never this quiet. There's always something making noise, especially at night. But standing there on that porch, the silence felt heavy, like pressure against my ears. I remember thinking it was weird, but chalked it up to the time of year or something. I slept fine that first night. The cabin had 3 small bedrooms upstairs. Mine faced the back of the property, with a window looking out at the endless trees climbing up the ridge behind us. The second day was totally normal. We hiked a bit in the morning, following this overgrown trail that wound up the ridge. Made lunch back at the cabin, then played cards and drank beer all afternoon. Basic guy trip stuff. But that second night, I started feeling uneasy. We were sitting around the fireplace again, and I kept getting this sensation like I was being watched. It was strongest when I had my back to the windows. I kept turning around, thinking I'd catch someone or something looking in, but there was never anything there, just darkness. Neither Chris nor Tyler seemed to notice anything off. I didn't mention it, didn't want to sound paranoid. Around midnight, we called it a night and headed to bed. I had trouble falling asleep. That feeling of being watched was stronger in my room. I kept staring at the window, half expecting to see a face appear. Eventually, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Day 3 is when things really started getting weird. I woke up earlier than the others, around 7. I went downstairs to make coffee and noticed the front door was unlocked. I was sure we'd locked it the night before. We'd joked about bears, and Tyler had made a point of turning the deadbolt. When I opened the door to check outside, I saw them. Footprints, large boot prints in the dirt, leading right up to our door. They weren't ours. We'd been wearing hiking shoes, and these were clearly from a larger, heavier boot. And they only went one way, up to the door, as if whoever made them had just stood there for a while, then, what? Disappeared? Flew away? I stood there staring at those prints for a good 5 minutes, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe the cabin owner had checked on us, but why not knock? And why in the middle of the night? When Chris and Tyler came downstairs, I pointed out the footprints. Tyler laughed it off at first, probably a ranger or something. But when we all went outside to look more closely, the joking stopped. The prints were deep, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy, and they definitely ended right at our door. Chris suggested it might be the owner checking on the property. Tyler agreed, and they seemed ready to dismiss it. But then Chris noticed something I hadn't. There were similar boot prints circling the cabin, stopping at each window, like someone had methodically looked into every window of the cabin during the night. That's when the mood changed. We tried to joke about it, but it felt forced. We all knew this wasn't normal. Who circles a remote cabin in the middle of the night, peering in windows? We decided to stick close to the cabin that day. No one said it outright, but I think we all wanted to keep an eye on the place. We played cards on the porch, drank more beer than we should have, trying to lighten the mood. But there was this undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. That night, we double-checked all the locks, closed all the curtains, and even pushed some furniture in front of the doors. We tried to laugh about it. Worst case, we've barricaded ourselves against a curious forest ranger. But the laughter was hollow. I woke up at 3:15 in the morning. I know because I checked my watch immediately after the sound woke me. It was a scratching noise, light but persistent, coming from the wall next to my bed. My first thought was raccoons or maybe squirrels in the walls. The cabin was old enough to have plenty of access points for small animals. But then the scratching moved, slowly, deliberately, along the wall, maintaining the same height. It wasn't random like an animal would make. It was steady, like someone dragging their fingernails or claws across the wooden exterior of the cabin. I sat up in bed, totally still, barely breathing. The scratching continued around the corner of the cabin, then stopped directly beneath my window. I waited, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then came a new sound, a soft tapping on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't move. I was literally frozen with fear. The curtains were closed, but they were thin enough that I could tell there was something outside, blocking the faint moonlight that had been filtering through. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I managed to reach for my phone on the nightstand. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the window. The tapping stopped. The shadow outside remained for maybe 5 more seconds, then moved away. The moonlight returned through the curtain. I must have sat there for another 30 minutes, flashlight still pointing at the window, before I got the courage to get out of bed. I crept to the window and, holding my breath, pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out. There was something, standing at the edge of the tree line, about 50 yards from the cabin. It was just a dark silhouette, completely motionless, facing the cabin, watching. I couldn't make out any features, just this tall, still figure half hidden among the trees. I let the curtain fall back and practically ran to Tyler's room. I shook him awake and whispered what I'd seen. He was groggy at first, but the fear in my voice must have gotten through to him because he got up without arguing. We woke Chris, and all 3 of us went downstairs, turning on every light in the cabin as we went. No one suggested looking outside again. Instead, we sat in the living room, lights blazing, waiting for dawn. That's when we heard it. The scratching had moved to the roof. Slow, methodical dragging sounds, moving from one end of the cabin to the other. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too heavy. Whatever was up there was big. The scratching continued for almost an hour. We sat in silence, occasionally exchanging glances but not saying a word. What was there to say? We all knew this wasn't normal, wasn't explainable. When the first light of dawn finally came, the scratching stopped. We waited another hour before Tyler volunteered to look outside. The footprints from the day before had been replaced by new ones, fresh, deeper, and more numerous. They circled the entire cabin multiple times, like whatever had made them had been pacing around us all night. We didn't talk about it. We just started packing. No one even suggested staying the 4th night we'd paid for. Within 30 minutes, we had thrown our stuff in bags, leaving behind food, some beer, even some clothing. None of us cared. We just wanted out. As we were loading the car, I looked up at the roof. There were marks there, long parallel grooves in the old wooden shingles, too evenly spaced to be anything but deliberate. They hadn't been there when we arrived. The drive back was completely silent for the first hour. Finally, Chris said, "What the hell was that all about?" No one answered because no one had an answer. We've never really talked about it since. Tyler texted me a few days after, just a brief, "That was weird, right?" I agreed, and that was it. Chris hasn't mentioned it at all, but I think about it all the time. I've looked online for similar experiences, for reports of strange happenings in those woods, but found nothing concrete, just vague stories about hikers feeling watched. about the unusual silence people notice in those parts. What keeps me up at night isn't the fear that it was something supernatural. It's the certainty that it wasn't. Whatever was watching us, whatever circled our cabin and climbed onto our roof, whatever stood in those trees staring at our windows, it was real, physical, present. And the most terrifying part? I'm convinced it was human, or at least it had been at some point. I'm never going back to those woods, but sometimes I wonder if a part of what was there came back with me. Because even now, 7 months later, I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched.